The Grand Hall of the Los Angeles Convention Center buzzed with excitement as the world's brightest young minds gathered for the annual Global Innovator Summit. The event was dominated by tech giants, media crews, and a scattered sea of ambitious teens and pre-teens eager to showcase their inventions. But among them stood a small, unassuming 10-year-old girl, Ellie Carter, clutching a boxy contraption pieced together with wires, screws, and what looked like recycled parts. She looked out of place, dwarfed by kids twice her size, polished booths, and sleek displays. Yet her dark brown eyes burned with quiet intensity as she scanned the room. Her invention wasn't flashy, no glowing lights or sleek touch screens, but it was the culmination of years of passion and relentless trial and error. The highlight of the summit was about to begin, a live Q&A session with Elon Musk. As the billionaire walked on stage to thunderous applause, Ellie swallowed hard. She had waited months for this opportunity, dreaming of the moment she could ask him a single question. A question that had kept her up at night, wondering if her idea could change the world. Elon, dressed in his signature black jacket and jeans, leaned against the podium. "All right," he began, his voice calm but commanding. "Let's hear from the future of innovation. Who's got a question?" Hands shot up across the room. Ellie hesitated, clutching her invention tighter. What if he thinks it's stupid? She thought. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "If you don't speak up, Ellie, no one will ever know what you're capable of." Taking a deep breath, Ellie raised her hand. "Yes, you," Elon said, pointing at her. Ellie stood, her heart pounding as every eye in the room turned to her. "Hi, Mr. Musk," she began, her voice trembling but determined. If someone found a way to generate energy from the air, enough to power a city, would you believe it's possible?" The room fell silent. Elon's eyebrow arched, a mix of intrigue and skepticism flickering across his face. "Generate energy from the air?" he repeated. "Yes," Ellie said, her confidence growing. "Using ambient energy from electromagnetic waves and heat." A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. Some laughed under their breath. A reporter whispered to his colleague, "That's bold, even for a 10-year-old. Elon, however, didn't laugh. He leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "That's an interesting theory," he said slowly. "But theories aren't enough. Do you have anything to back it up?" Ellie straightened her shoulders. "I do," she said, lifting her contraption. "This." Elon's eyes narrowed as he motioned for her to come forward. "All right, Ellie," he said. "Show us what you've got." Ellie's pulse raced as she walked toward the stage, her invention trembling in her hands. She could feel the weight of the crowd's judgment, but she pushed it aside. This was her moment. As she set her device on the table, Elon stood beside her, towering over her small frame. "What does it do?" he asked. "It converts stray electromagnetic energy into usable electricity," Ellie explained. "It's not perfect yet, but it works." Elon nodded, gesturing for her to proceed. "Prove it." Ellie's hands shook as she flipped a switch on her device. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a faint hum, a small light bulb connected to the device flickered to life. The audience gasped. Whispers filled the room, some in awe, others in disbelief. "It's a trick," someone muttered. "She rigged it." But Elon remained silent, watching intently. He stepped closer, examining the device. "Interesting," he said, "but this isn't enough to power a city, or even a house. If you want to convince me, you'll need to scale this up." Ellie looked up at him, her fear replaced by a fiery determination. "I can," she said. "I just need a chance." Elon's lips curled into a faint smile. "All right," he said, standing tall. "Let's see if you're as smart as you think you are." The room erupted in chatter as Ellie stepped off the stage, her heart still racing. She had done it. She had caught Elon Musk's attention. But as she looked back at him, she saw something in his eyes, a challenge. And she wasn't about to back down. The Carter household was a modest two-bedroom apartment on the edge of a small, unremarkable town. The building was old, with peeling paint and creaky floors, but Ellie and her mother had made it a home. The kitchen table was always strewn with spare parts, screws, and wires. A makeshift workshop where Ellie spent countless hours tinkering, much to her mother's chagrin. Ellie, her mother, Rachel, called from the kitchen as she scraped the remains of dinner into the trash. Can you at least move your whatever that is off the table? We need to eat. It's a wireless energy harvester, Mom, Ellie replied without looking up, her small hands deftly twisting a screwdriver. And I'm almost done. Rachel sighed, leaning against the counter. At 32, she had a youthful face, though the lines of worry and exhaustion were beginning to creep in. Raising Ellie alone had been a challenge. Her daughter wasn't like other kids. While her classmates played with dolls or video games, Ellie took apart toasters and microwaves to see how they worked. By the time she was 8, she built her first radio from salvaged parts. But Ellie's brilliance came with its own set of challenges. School was a nightmare. Teachers didn't know how to handle her, and other kids teased her for being weird. Rachel had lost count of how many times Ellie had come home in tears, swearing she'd never go back. Ellie, Rachel said gently, sitting down across from her, you're incredible. You know that, right? But sometimes, I just want you to be a kid. I don't want to be just a kid, Ellie said, tightening a bolt on her device. I want to change the world. Rachel smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from Ellie's face. I know you do, and you will. But you don't have to do it all at once, okay? You're only 10. Ellie sighed, setting down her tools. Mom, if I wait, someone else might figure it out first. Rachel didn't have the heart to tell her daughter that the world wasn't always kind to people like her, people who dreamed too big, too soon. Instead, she kissed the top of Ellie's head and said, well, then I guess you'd better finish that thing before dinner. Ellie's fascination with energy began 3 years earlier, during a town-wide blackout. Rachel had lit candles and told Ellie it would be like camping, but Ellie had been restless. She hated the dark. Why don't they just make electricity out of, I don't know, air or something? Ellie had asked, her face illuminated by candlelight. Rachel had laughed. If it were that easy, don't you think someone would have done it by now? That night, while the town slept, Ellie had stayed up sketching her first ideas for an energy harvester. Over time, she taught herself the basics of engineering and physics through library books and online videos, saving every penny she could to buy parts from secondhand stores. Her breakthrough came when she discovered a way to harness stray electromagnetic waves, an idea she'd refined over months until it became the prototype she now carried everywhere. But Ellie's journey hadn't been without setbacks. At last year's regional science fair, she'd eagerly presented her earlier model to the judges. She'd been confident, maybe too confident, but halfway through her demonstration, the device had sparked and died, leaving her humiliated in front of a crowd of peers and parents. It's okay, Ellie, Rachel had told her afterward, wrapping an arm around her as they walked to the car. You'll get it right next time. But Ellie had cried herself to sleep that night, vowing never to show her work in public again. Now, a year later, she was on the verge of breaking that promise. The memory of that failure loomed large, but so did the hope that this time would be different. On the night before the tech summit, Ellie sat on her bed, staring at her invention. Do you think they'll believe me, Mom? She asked quietly. Rachel sat beside her, wrapping her in a warm embrace. It doesn't matter what they believe, she said. What matters is that you believe in yourself. And I believe in you. Ellie nodded, wiping away a tear. Thanks, Mom. The next morning, as they packed into Rachel's aging sedan and drove to the summit, Ellie looked out the window, her heart pounding with anticipation. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew one thing. She was ready to prove herself. Back in the present, as Ellie walked off the stage after her brief exchange with Elon Musk, she clutched her invention tightly. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she had taken the first step. And for Ellie, that was enough. The day after the summit, Ellie's life turned upside down. At school, she was no longer the quiet, weird girl sitting alone at lunch. Whispers followed her through the hallways. Did you see her on the live stream? She talked to Elon Musk. She built some kind of energy thing. My dad says it's impossible. But Ellie didn't care about the sudden attention. She wasn't interested in popularity or proving her classmates wrong. All she could think about was what Elon Musk had said. If you want to convince me, you'll need to scale this up. That phrase replayed in her head as she sat at her usual spot in the school library, sketching blueprints for an improved version of her energy harvester. The problem was, scaling up wasn't as simple as just making it bigger. The device worked, but only on a small scale. To power something larger, like a house, let alone a city, she needed stronger components, better materials, and more resources than she could afford. Still, Ellie wasn't about to give up. If there was one thing she knew how to do, it was finding a way when the odds were against her. Later that evening, as Ellie sat at the kitchen table tinkering with her invention, her mom walked in, holding her phone. "Ellie," Rachel said cautiously, "I just got an email." Ellie looked up, a smudge of grease on her cheek. From who? From Tesla. Or, well, from Elon Musk's assistant. Ellie's screwdriver clattered to the table. What? Rachel handed her the phone. Ellie's hands trembled as she read the email. Dear Ellie Carter, Mr. Musk was impressed by your presentation at the Global Innovators Summit. He would like to offer you a chance to prove your concept on a larger scale. You are invited to Tesla headquarters in Palo Alto for a one-week mentorship program, during which you will have access to our facilities and resources to develop your project further. Please confirm your availability by replying to this email. Ellie's jaw dropped. Mom, this is real, right? I'm not dreaming. Rachel smiled, her eyes misty with pride. It's real, sweetheart. Ellie hugged her mom tightly, her mind already racing with possibilities. This was her chance, the opportunity of a lifetime. But as the excitement settled, doubt began to creep in. What if she failed? What if her device didn't work on a larger scale? Rachel seemed to sense her unease. Ellie, you don't have to do this if you're not ready, she said gently. No, Ellie said, shaking her head. I have to try. He believed in me enough to give me a chance. I can't waste it. The next week passed in a blur. Rachel took time off work to drive Ellie to Palo Alto, a journey that felt surreal. The Tesla headquarters was unlike anything Ellie had ever seen. Gleaming buildings surrounded by perfectly manicured lawns and employees zipping around on electric scooters. A woman in a sleek blazer greeted them at the entrance. Welcome, Ellie, she said warmly. Mr. Musk is looking forward to working with you. Ellie swallowed her nerves and nodded. The next few hours were a whirlwind. Ellie was given a tour of the facility, introduced to a team of engineers, and shown to a workspace that was bigger than her entire apartment. It was stocked with state-of-the-art equipment, tools she had only dreamed of using. And then, Elon Musk himself walked in. Ellie, he said, his tone businesslike but not unkind. Glad you made it. Are you ready to get to work? Yes, sir, Ellie said, standing as straight as her nerves would allow. Elon glanced at the sketches she had pinned to a board. Good start, he said. But you've got a long way to go. Let's see if you can handle the pressure. Over the next few days, Ellie worked harder than she ever had in her life. The engineers at Tesla were supportive but skeptical. They asked tough questions, poked holes in her design, and challenged her assumptions. Your energy conversion rate isn't high enough, one of them said. You need a better cooling system, another pointed out. At times, Ellie felt like she was drowning in a sea of equations and technical jargon. But every time she wanted to give up, she remembered why she was there. To prove that her invention wasn't just a crazy idea. On the third night, Ellie sat alone in the lab, staring at her half-assembled prototype. Her hands were blistered from handling tools, and her eyes burned from lack of sleep. I can't do this, she whispered to herself. Can't do what? Ellie jumped, spinning around to see Elon standing in the doorway. Mr. Musk, she said, quickly wiping her eyes. I'm stuck. Nothing's working the way it's supposed to. Elon walked over and studied her prototype. That's normal, he said matter-of-factly. Innovation is messy. If everything worked perfectly the first time, we wouldn't need engineers. Ellie looked down at her hands. But what if I can't fix it? What if I'm not good enough? Elon crouched down to meet her eyes. Ellie, do you know how many rockets I've blown up? She shook her head. More than I can count, he said with a small smile. Failure isn't the end. It's part of the process. You've got a good idea. Now you just need to figure out how to make it work. And that takes time. Ellie nodded slowly. I'll try. Don't try, Elon said, standing up. Do. As he walked out, Ellie felt a spark of determination reignite. She wasn't going to let her doubts win. Not now. By the end of the week, Ellie's prototype was complete. It wasn't perfect, but it worked, and it was scalable. The real test, however, was yet to come. The prototype stood on the sleek white lab table, humming softly. Ellie's heart raced as she stepped back, wiping her sweaty palms on her jeans. The room was quiet except for the faint whirring of machines and the murmurs of the engineers watching her from the far side of the room. Elon Musk stood beside them, his arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, fixed on the device. "This is it, Ellie," he said. "Your prototype's first test on a larger scale. Are you ready?" Ellie hesitated. Was she ready? Her fingers twitched with the urge to make one last adjustment, but she knew there was no time. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "Yes, I'm ready." The engineers moved into position, connecting the prototype to a series of monitors and power meters. Ellie watched as one of them tapped on a keyboard, activating the test simulation. "All set," the lead engineer announced. "You're clear to start." Ellie stepped forward and placed her hand on the activation switch. For a moment, she felt the weight of the room's silence pressing down on her. Everyone was watching. With a deep breath, she flipped the switch. The prototype came to life with a low hum, its lights flickering in rhythmic patterns. The power meters began to spike, and data flooded the monitors. Ellie held her breath, her eyes darting between the machine and the screens. At first, everything seemed perfect. The energy conversion rates were stable, and the output exceeded the engineers' expectations. Ellie's heart soared with relief. "Impressive," one of the engineers muttered, jotting notes on a tablet. But then, without warning, the hum grew louder, too loud. A high-pitched whine pierced the air, and the lights on the prototype began to flash erratically. "Something's wrong," one of the engineers shouted. Ellie's stomach dropped as she raced to the machine, her mind scrambling for answers. She could see the heat levels on the monitors climbing dangerously high. "It's overheating." Ellie grabbed a nearby wrench, her hands shaking as she worked to adjust the cooling mechanism. Sweat dripped down her forehead as the room filled with tension. "Elon, we need to shut it down," one of the engineers said urgently. But Elon shook his head. "Give her a chance." Ellie's fingers moved with a speed she didn't know she had. She adjusted a valve, rerouted a connection, and finally tightened one last bolt. The machine let out a sputtering cough, and then silence. The room was still for a moment, the air thick with anticipation. Then the monitors began to beep steadily. The energy output stabilized, and the cooling system kicked in, bringing the heat levels back to normal. "It's working," the lead engineer said, his voice filled with disbelief. Ellie collapsed into a chair, her legs trembling. She looked up at Elon, who was now smiling, a rare and genuine expression. "Well done," he said. Later that evening, Ellie sat alone in the lab, staring at her prototype. It wasn't perfect, but it had worked. She had proved her concept could function on a larger scale, even if it needed fine-tuning. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. She turned to see Elon approaching. "You surprised me today," he said, pulling up a chair beside her. "Really?" Ellie asked, her voice still shaky. "I thought I almost ruined everything." "You did," Elon said bluntly. "But you fixed it. That's what matters. A lot of people freeze under pressure. You didn't." Ellie looked down at her hands, which were still smudged with grease. "I was scared." "Good," Elon said. "Fear means you care. Just don't let it stop you." Ellie nodded. "Thank you for giving me this chance." Elon leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You've got potential, Ellie, but this is just the beginning. The real world isn't as forgiving as this lab. If you want to make a difference, you'll need to keep pushing yourself. Can you do that?" Ellie met his gaze, her determination returning. "Yes, I can." The next day, Ellie and Rachel packed their bags and prepared to return home. As they stood in the Tesla lobby, Elon handed Ellie a small notebook. "What's this?" she asked. "Your next challenge," he said with a smirk. Ellie opened the notebook to find a list of problems, complex equations, theoretical designs, and ideas for improving her prototype. At the bottom, Elon had written, "Don't stop here. The world needs thinkers like you. Ellie clutched the notebook to her chest, her heart swelling with pride and purpose. As she and her mom drove away, Ellie stared out the window, already planning her next steps. She didn't know where this journey would take her, but she was ready for whatever came next. Returning home felt surreal. After a week surrounded by some of the brightest minds in the world and working in a state-of-the-art lab, Ellie found herself back in her small, cluttered bedroom. The same posters hung on her walls, her old textbooks were scattered across her desk, and the faint hum of the cheap fan in the corner reminded her that she was far from the glossy halls of Tesla. But something was different. Ellie had changed. Her notebook from Elon Musk sat on her desk like a beacon of possibility. Every time she looked at it, she felt a surge of determination. But reality quickly set in. Her prototype still needed work, and the resources she had at home were limited. At school, the whispers hadn't stopped. Ellie walked into the cafeteria and felt eyes follow her every move. Some of her classmates stared at her like she was an alien. "Is it true you met Elon Musk?" one girl asked as Ellie sat down with her lunch tray. "Yeah," Ellie said, trying to sound casual. Another boy leaned forward. "Did he, give you a job or something?" Ellie shook her head. "Not exactly. He just encouraged me to keep working on my project." The boy rolled his eyes. "Figures. Bet it's not even that impressive." Ellie felt her cheeks flush, but didn't respond. She wasn't here to prove anything to them. As the days went on, the novelty of her trip to Tesla began to wear off, and Ellie found herself back in her usual spot in the library, poring over her notebook and sketching new designs. That evening, Ellie sat at the kitchen table, tinkering with her prototype. Her mom, Rachel, joined her with a cup of tea in hand. "How's it coming along?" Rachel asked. "Slowly," Ellie admitted. "I need better materials, and I can't afford them right now." Rachel frowned, clearly wishing she could help more. "Have you thought about reaching out to anyone? Maybe there's a way to get funding." Ellie sighed. "I've been looking into it, but most grants are for adults or university students. No one takes a 10-year-old seriously." Rachel reached over and squeezed Ellie's hand. "You're not just any 10-year-old, Ellie. You'll figure it out. You always do." The breakthrough came 2 weeks later, in the most unexpected way. Ellie's teacher, Mrs. Peterson, asked her to stay after class one afternoon. "I heard about your project," Mrs. Peterson said, smiling warmly, "and I think it's incredible what you've accomplished." "Thanks," Ellie said, unsure where this was going. "I also heard you're struggling to find the resources you need," Mrs. Peterson continued. "Have you ever heard of the Young Innovators Grant?" Ellie shook her head. "It's a national competition for students working on STEM projects," Mrs. Peterson explained. "The winner gets a $50,000 grant to fund their research." Ellie's eyes widened. $50,000? Mrs. Peterson nodded. "I think you should apply. You'd have to submit a detailed proposal and present your work to a panel of judges, but I have no doubt you'd impress them." Ellie felt a flicker of hope. "Do you really think I have a chance?" "I do," Mrs. Peterson said firmly. "You've already done more than most adults I know. This is just the next step." That evening, Ellie told Rachel about the grant, and they both agreed it was worth a shot. The application process was intense. Ellie had to write a detailed essay about her invention, explain the science behind it, and outline how she would use the grant money. For weeks, she stayed up late, pouring all her energy into the application. She even emailed a few of the engineers she had met at Tesla, asking for advice. To her surprise, they responded with helpful suggestions and words of encouragement. By the time Ellie submitted her application, she felt both exhausted and exhilarated. A month later, Ellie was sitting in class when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She knew she wasn't supposed to check it during school, but something told her this was important. Sneaking a glance, she saw an email notification. Subject: "Congratulations." Her heart pounded as she read the message. She had been selected as one of the finalists for the Young Innovators Grant. The following week, Ellie and Rachel traveled to the state capitol, where the final round of the competition was held. Ellie stood on a stage in front of a panel of judges, presenting her invention with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She explained how her energy harvester worked, its potential applications, and the improvements she planned to make with the grant money. When she finished, The judges asked tough questions. What are the biggest challenges you anticipate? One of them asked. Scaling the technology while keeping costs low, Ellie replied confidently. But I believe with the right resources, it's possible. Another judge leaned forward. Why do you think your invention is important? Ellie hesitated for a moment, then said, because energy should be accessible to everyone. There are places in the world where people can't even turn on a light bulb. I want to change that. When the winners were announced later that evening, Ellie's heart raced. She gripped Rachel's hand tightly as the host read out the names. And the first place winner of the Young Innovators Grant is Ellie Carter. The room erupted into applause, but Ellie barely heard it. She felt like she was floating as she walked up to the stage to accept her award. This wasn't just a win for her. It was proof that her dream was possible. Ellie returned home with a renewed sense of purpose and a check for $50,000. The first thing she did was open her notebook from Elon Musk and start making a list of materials she could now afford. This was just the beginning, and Ellie knew she had a long road ahead. But for the first time, she truly believed she could change the world. Ellie's room became an organized chaos of blueprints, wires, and half-assembled prototypes. With the grant money, she was able to order high-quality materials, tools, and even a few specialized components that she had only dreamed of before. Each delivery felt like Christmas morning as Ellie tore open boxes containing precision instruments, cutting-edge microchips, and custom parts she had designed online. For the first time, she had everything she needed to take her prototype to the next level. But she also knew she couldn't do it alone. One afternoon, Ellie called a meeting with her closest friends, Hannah, a coding whiz, Marco, who excelled in physics, and Lily, whose artistic flair made her brilliant at design. They sat around Ellie's kitchen table, staring at the sketches she had spread out. "This is insane," Marco said, running a hand through his curly hair. "You're actually building this?" "I can't do it without you," Ellie admitted. "Marco, I need your help with the energy calculations." "Hannah, you're the only person I know who can write the kind of software this thing needs." "And Lily, I want you to design the casing. Something sleek and user-friendly." The three exchanged glances. "I'm in," Hannah said, grinning. "Me too," Marco added. Lily leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Let's do this." For weeks, Ellie and her team worked tirelessly. They converted Ellie's garage into a makeshift lab, complete with workbenches and labeled bins of components. Hannah sat in the corner with her laptop, typing furiously as she wrote code to optimize the energy harvesting system. Marco experimented with different materials to improve efficiency, and Lily sketched dozens of designs before finally settling on a sleek, futuristic look for the device. Ellie coordinated everything, jumping between tasks and troubleshooting problems as they arose. The team quickly realized that her leadership skills were just as impressive as her technical abilities. But the road wasn't without obstacles. One evening, Marco burst into the garage, holding a sheet of calculations. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice tense. Ellie looked up from her work. "What's wrong?" "The conversion rates drop significantly when the device is exposed to certain conditions, high humidity, for example. If we don't fix this, it'll fail in real-world applications." Ellie frowned, studying the numbers. "Okay, let's think this through. Can we coat the components with a moisture-resistant material?" Marco shook his head. "That would interfere with the energy flow." "What about creating an internal climate control system?" Hannah suggested. Ellie's eyes lit up. "That could work. Marco, can you start drafting some ideas?" "Hannah, look into sensors we can use to monitor environmental conditions." As the team dove back into work, Ellie felt a surge of gratitude. Together, they could tackle any challenge. Meanwhile, Ellie's success had started to attract attention. A local news station reached out, asking to do a feature on her project. At first, Ellie hesitated. She didn't like being in the spotlight, but Rachel convinced her it was a good opportunity to share her vision. The day of the interview, Ellie stood in the garage, nervously adjusting her hoodie as the camera crew set up. "So, Ellie," the reporter began, smiling warmly, "can you tell us about your invention?" Ellie took a deep breath. "It's a portable energy harvester. The idea is to create a device that can generate power from everyday motion, walking, biking, even the wind. It's meant to provide clean, accessible energy for people who don't have reliable electricity. That's an incredible goal, the reporter said. What inspired you to create this? Ellie glanced at Rachel, who was watching from the sidelines. My mom. She's the hardest worker I know, and she's always taught me to think about how I can help others. That's what this project is about, making life better for people. The reporter nodded. And what's next for you? Ellie smiled, her confidence growing. This is just the beginning. I want to refine the prototype, test it in different environments, and eventually make it available to the public. The segment aired a week later, and the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people around the country, offering support, advice, and even additional funding. One email stood out. It was from a representative at a major technology company, inviting Ellie to present her prototype at an upcoming innovation conference. Ellie stared at the email, her heart pounding. The conference was a chance to showcase her work to some of the biggest names in the industry, but it was also intimidating. Are you going to do it? Rachel asked as Ellie showed her the email. I have to, Ellie said, determination hardening in her voice. If I want this to succeed, I need to put myself out there. Over the next few weeks, Ellie and her team worked harder than ever to perfect the prototype. They stayed up late troubleshooting issues, tweaking the design, and rehearsing Ellie's presentation. The night before the conference, the team gathered in the garage, exhausted but excited. The prototype sat in the center of the table, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. We did it, Marco said, leaning back in his chair. We're not done yet, Ellie said, grinning. Tomorrow's the big day. The morning of the conference, Ellie stood backstage, clutching her prototype and trying to steady her breathing. She could hear the murmur of the crowd on the other side of the curtain. Rachel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You've got this, Ellie. Just be yourself. Ellie nodded, her nerves settling as she stepped onto the stage. This was her moment to show the world what she was capable of. Ellie stepped onto the stage, her small figure illuminated by the spotlight. The audience, a mix of industry leaders, engineers, and media representatives, watched her with curious anticipation. Her heart raced as she set the prototype on the podium. She adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath, and began. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ellie Carter, and I'm 10 years old, she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. I'm here today because I believe energy should be accessible to everyone, no matter where they live or what their circumstances are. Ellie's presentation was simple but powerful. She explained the science behind her energy harvester in a way that was easy to understand, showing how it could generate power from everyday motion and store it for later use. She described the potential impact it could have in rural areas, disaster zones, and developing countries. Imagine a child being able to study at night because their family can generate electricity by simply walking during the day, Ellie said, her voice growing more confident. Imagine a community having power during a storm because the wind itself can charge their devices. That's what this invention is about, turning ordinary motion into extraordinary possibilities. The audience leaned forward, captivated. When Ellie finished her presentation, the room erupted into applause. She stepped back, her cheeks flushed, as the moderator walked onto the stage. Thank you, Ellie, the moderator said with a smile. We'll now open the floor to questions. A man in the front row raised his hand. He was older, with gray hair and a sharp suit, someone who exuded authority. This is impressive work, Ellie, he said. But have you thought about the challenges of scaling this technology for mass production? Ellie nodded. That's definitely one of the biggest challenges. Right now, my team and I are focusing on refining the prototype to ensure it's efficient and reliable. Once we've perfected the design, we'll explore partnerships with manufacturers to bring it to a larger scale. Another hand went up. This time, it was a young woman with glasses and a warm smile. How do you plan to make the device affordable for low-income communities? Affordability is a priority, Ellie said. We're experimenting with materials and processes to keep costs down, and I'm hoping to work with organizations that can subsidize the cost for those who need it most. The questions continued, each one more challenging than the last, but Ellie handled them all with poise. By the end, she had earned not just applause but respect. Backstage, Ellie was met with hugs and cheers from her team. You crushed it. Hannah exclaimed, practically bouncing with excitement. I don't think I've ever been so nervous, Ellie admitted, laughing. Rachel pulled her into a tight hug. You were amazing, sweetie. I'm so proud of you. As they packed up the prototype, Ellie's phone buzzed with notifications. Tweets, emails, and messages flooded in from people who had seen her presentation, including offers to collaborate and requests for interviews. But one message stood out. It was from Elon Musk. Ellie, the email began. I just saw your presentation at the conference, and I'm blown away by the progress you've made. Your passion and ingenuity are exactly what the world needs right now. I'd like to invite you back to Tesla for a special meeting. Let me know if you're interested. Ellie stared at the screen, her mouth falling open. What is it? Rachel asked, noticing her expression. It's Elon Musk, Ellie said, her voice barely above a whisper. He wants to meet with me again. Her team erupted into excited chatter, but Ellie could barely process it. The invitation felt like validation, not just of her work, but of her dreams. The following week, Ellie found herself back at Tesla, sitting in a sleek conference room across from Elon Musk. This time, the atmosphere was less intimidating. Elon smiled warmly as he listened to Ellie talk about the progress she and her team had made. I'm impressed, Ellie, he said. You've accomplished more in a few months than most people do in years. I'd like to help you take this to the next level. Ellie's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? I want to offer you a mentorship program, Elon explained. You'll have access to Tesla's resources, labs, and engineers. We'll work together to refine your invention and explore ways to bring it to market. Ellie blinked, hardly believing what she was hearing. You're serious? Elon chuckled. Dead serious. The world needs innovators like you, Ellie. This is just the beginning. As Ellie left Tesla that day, she felt like she was walking on air. The mentorship program was a dream come true, but it also came with new challenges. She knew the road ahead would be demanding, but she was ready. Her journey wasn't just about creating an invention. It was about proving that age, background, and circumstances didn't define what someone could achieve. And as she looked up at the sky, Ellie whispered to herself, let's change the world. Ellie arrived at Tesla's headquarters a week later, accompanied by Rachel. This time, the sprawling campus no longer felt intimidating. Instead, it felt like a portal to infinite possibilities. As they entered the research lab, Ellie's eyes widened. She had seen advanced tools and equipment in her research, but being surrounded by cutting-edge technology in person was like stepping into a dream. Engineers moved swiftly between workstations, while robots performed delicate tasks with precision. A tall woman with a kind smile approached. You must be Ellie, she said, extending a hand. I'm Dr. Sophia Reynolds. I'll be your point of contact for the mentorship program. Hi, Ellie said, shaking her hand, her nerves quickly replaced by excitement. Sophia led Ellie and Rachel through the lab, explaining the resources she'd have access to: 3D printers, high-powered processors for simulations, and state-of-the-art testing chambers. You'll have your own workspace, Sophia added, gesturing to a large table surrounded by tools. And we've assigned a team of engineers to help you refine your prototype. Ellie glanced at Rachel, who smiled and gave her a reassuring nod. Thank you, Ellie said, her voice filled with gratitude. Over the next few weeks, Ellie threw herself into the mentorship program. Each day began with a meeting where Sophia and the engineers helped Ellie set goals and troubleshoot issues. Marco and Hannah joined virtually, contributing their insights and suggestions, while Lily focused on polishing the final design of the casing. The team at Tesla was impressed by Ellie's ability to hold her ground during technical discussions. Despite being the youngest person in the room, she spoke with confidence and clarity, earning their respect. One afternoon, Ellie hit a roadblock. The prototype worked well in controlled conditions, but struggled in extreme environments like deserts or freezing temperatures. Frustrated, she sat at her desk, scribbling equations on a whiteboard. Sophia approached, noticing Ellie's furrowed brow. What's on your mind? She asked. It's the temperature issue, Ellie admitted. We've tried everything, insulation, thermal coatings, but nothing works without affecting efficiency. Sophia studied the equations. Have you considered using phase change materials? Ellie blinked. What's that? They're materials that absorb or release energy when they change states, like from solid to liquid, Sophia explained. We could incorporate them into the device to regulate temperature naturally. Ellie's eyes lit up. That's brilliant. Can we try it? Of course, Sophia said, smiling. With Sophia's guidance, Ellie and her team integrated phase change materials into the prototype. After weeks of adjustments and testing, they finally achieved a breakthrough. The prototype now performed flawlessly in all conditions. Ellie watched in awe as it generated consistent energy output during a simulated desert storm and a freezing snowstorm. We did it, Ellie whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Sophia patted her shoulder. No, Ellie, you did it. News of Ellie's success spread quickly. Tesla announced a partnership to help develop her invention further, and major media outlets began covering her story. One evening, Ellie sat with Rachel in their living room, watching an interview Elon Musk had given. Ellie Carter is a reminder that innovation knows no age, Elon said. Her invention has the potential to change millions of lives, and I'm honored to be part of her journey. Rachel smiled proudly, pulling Ellie into a hug. You're making waves, kiddo. Ellie grinned. I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. But with success came new challenges. As Ellie's invention gained attention, critics began to surface. Some questioned the feasibility of mass production. Others doubted whether a 10-year-old could truly be behind such a groundbreaking invention. One particularly harsh article read, "Genius or gimmick?" Experts weigh in on Ellie Carter's invention. Ellie tried to brush it off, but the negativity got under her skin. One night, Ellie called Marco, her voice shaky. What if they're right? What if I'm just a kid who got lucky? Ellie, stop, Marco said firmly. You didn't get lucky. You've worked harder than anyone I know. Don't let a few naysayers bring you down. Hannah chimed in on the call. Marco's right. Besides, every great inventor faced criticism. It's part of the journey. Ellie took a deep breath. Thanks, guys. I needed that. Determined to prove herself, Ellie doubled down on her work. She collaborated with Tesla's engineers to create a detailed production plan, addressing the concerns critics had raised. When she presented the plan during a meeting with Tesla's executives, the room erupted into applause. Ellie, Elon said, standing up, you've silenced every doubter out there. This plan is airtight. Ellie beamed, feeling a renewed sense of confidence. That evening, as she walked through the Tesla campus with Rachel, Ellie looked up at the stars. Mom, she said, I used to think changing the world was just a dream. But now, I think it's possible. Rachel squeezed her hand. It's more than possible, Ellie. You're already doing it. Ellie's life transformed overnight as her invention gained global recognition. News outlets worldwide clamored for interviews. Headlines ranged from "The 10-year-old genius revolutionizing energy" to "Ellie Carter, a bright light in the future of sustainability." She was invited to speak at conferences, featured in magazines, and even trended on social media under hashtags like #EllieTheInventor and #PowerOfGenius. For a 10-year-old, it was overwhelming. One afternoon, Ellie sat cross-legged on her bed, scrolling through Twitter. The majority of comments were supportive, but there were still a few skeptics. How can a kid invent something this advanced? Must be Tesla doing all the work. Ugh, Ellie muttered, tossing her phone onto the bed. Rachel peeked into the room. What's wrong? It's just, people don't believe I'm the one behind the invention, Ellie said, frustration evident in her voice. Rachel sat beside her. Ellie, remember what Grandma used to say? Don't let anyone dim your light just because it's shining too bright. Ellie smiled faintly. I just wish I didn't have to prove myself all the time. You don't, Rachel said gently. Your work speaks for itself. Focus on that, and the rest will follow. The following week, Ellie received an invitation to the United Nations Global Innovation Summit in New York City. The email read, Dear Ellie Carter, we are thrilled to invite you as a keynote speaker to share your invention and vision for sustainable energy at this year's summit. Leaders from over 150 countries will be attending, and we believe your voice will inspire a new generation of innovators. Ellie stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Mom, I'm speaking at the UN. Rachel rushed over, gasping. Ellie, this is incredible. But as the excitement wore off, Ellie felt the familiar tug of anxiety. Speaking at the UN wasn't just a presentation. It was a platform in front of some of the most influential people in the world. A week later, Ellie stood backstage at the UN headquarters, dressed in a crisp white blouse and navy skirt. She clutched her note cards, rehearsing her speech under her breath. Elon Musk, who had flown in to support her, appeared by her side. "You nervous?" Ellie nodded. "Terrified." He smiled. "Good. That means you care. Just remember, Ellie, no one knows your invention better than you. Speak from the heart, and they'll listen." When Ellie stepped onto the stage, she was greeted by a sea of faces. Delegates, scientists, journalists. They all watched as this young girl took her place behind the podium. "Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen," Ellie began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "My name is Ellie Carter, and I'm here today because I believe in a world where energy is not a privilege but a right." She spoke passionately about her invention, the journey of creating it, and its potential to transform lives. She shared stories of families in rural areas who could benefit from the device and emphasized the importance of innovation driven by compassion. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Delegates stood, clapping and nodding in approval. Ellie's cheeks burned with pride as she stepped back from the podium. After her speech, Ellie was surrounded by dignitaries and industry leaders. A representative from the World Bank approached her with a proposal to fund pilot programs in developing countries. A scientist from Kenya invited her to collaborate on bringing the technology to remote villages. But the most surprising encounter was with a girl about Ellie's age. She had curly hair, glasses, and a notebook clutched to her chest. "Hi," the girl said shyly. "I'm Amina. I just wanted to say you're amazing." Ellie smiled. "Thank you, Amina. Are you interested in science?" Amina nodded enthusiastically. "I'm trying to invent something that helps people grow food in deserts. Watching you makes me feel like I can actually do it." Ellie felt a lump in her throat. "You can do it, Amina. And when you do, I hope I get to hear all about it." That night, back at the hotel, Ellie stared out the window at the glittering New York skyline. Rachel sat beside her, scrolling through photos from the summit. "Today was unbelievable," Rachel said, showing Ellie a picture of her on stage. "You were a star." Ellie nodded. "It feels like this is just the beginning, you know? There's so much more I want to do." "And you will," Rachel said, wrapping an arm around her. "One step at a time." As Ellie gazed at the city lights, she whispered, "The world is so big, Mom. But for the first time, it doesn't feel scary. It feels full of possibilities." Rachel smiled. "That's because it is, sweetheart. And you're helping make it brighter." Ellie's newfound fame wasn't all glitz and glam. While she enjoyed speaking at international events and making a difference, she quickly learned that being in the spotlight came with its own set of challenges. Back at home in California, Ellie found it hard to go anywhere without someone recognizing her. Whether it was at the grocery store or a park, people approached her with admiration. Some even asked for photos, while others wanted to know more about her invention. At first, Ellie liked the attention. It was flattering to know that her work was being appreciated. But as the weeks went on, it started to feel overwhelming. She longed for the days when she could just blend in with the crowd. One afternoon, after an interview for a popular tech magazine, Ellie returned home exhausted. She flopped onto the couch, her feet aching. "You okay?" Rachel asked, sitting beside her. "I don't know," Ellie admitted, looking up at the ceiling. "I mean, people say nice things, but I'm not used to this. It feels like I'm always being watched. I miss when things were just normal." Rachel gave her a soft smile. "I get it, Ellie. Being in the spotlight can be tough. But remember, it's not about the fame. It's about the work you're doing." "I know," Ellie said quietly. "But sometimes, I just want to be a regular kid again." Rachel hugged her tightly. "You'll always be my regular kid, no matter how big the world gets." Despite her growing discomfort with the attention, Ellie continued to work on her project with a newfound determination. She poured all her energy into refining the energy device, determined to make it even better. Her team at Tesla had become like a second family, and her collaboration with Sophia and the engineers was something Ellie cherished deeply. They were constantly brainstorming ways to improve the design, pushing the boundaries of what they thought was possible. But as Ellie's public profile grew, so did the pressure. With every new breakthrough, the expectations mounted. People were no longer just curious about her work. They were eager for results. They wanted her invention to change the world now. One morning, Ellie sat in a strategy meeting at Tesla. Elon Musk was there, along with the engineers and a few other industry leaders. Everyone was excited about the progress, but Ellie could feel the weight of their expectations pressing on her shoulders. "We're on track for a full-scale prototype," one of the engineers said. "But we need to scale up production quickly if we want to meet the growing demand." Ellie felt a knot in her stomach. But what if we rush it and something goes wrong? What if we end up failing? Elon turned to her with a reassuring look. "Ellie, we've all seen what you're capable of. You've proven time and time again that you can handle challenges. But you're not alone in this. We're all here to support you." Sophia, who had been quietly observing, added, "Remember, Ellie, it's not about being perfect. It's about making progress, learning from setbacks, and continuing to move forward." Ellie nodded slowly. "I just don't want to let anyone down." "You won't," Elon said with conviction. "You've already done more than most people twice your age. But it's okay to take your time. We believe in you." Even with the support of her mentors and teammates, Ellie couldn't shake the pressure. As the public continued to demand more, she found herself becoming more withdrawn. She spent long nights in her lab, working on the prototype, barely finding time for anything else. One evening, as Ellie labored over her design, she received a text from Marco. "Hey, I miss hanging out. Are you free this weekend? Maybe we could catch a movie or grab some ice cream?" Ellie smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. It had been a while since she'd had a chance to relax and enjoy simple things with her friends. She quickly typed back, "I'd love that. I'll make some time for it." That weekend, Ellie and Marco went to their favorite ice cream shop. As they sat on the bench, slurping chocolate shakes and laughing, Ellie felt the weight of the world lift off her shoulders, if only for a little while. "I forgot how nice it is to just hang out and not worry about anything," Ellie said, her voice light. Marco grinned. "I know, right? You're still the same Ellie to me, even if you're changing the world." Ellie laughed. "Maybe, but I definitely need to find a balance between saving the planet and having fun." "Exactly," Marco agreed. "You're a kid. Don't forget to enjoy being one." Later that night, Ellie lay in bed, her mind racing with thoughts. For the first time in weeks, she realized that she didn't have to do everything alone. The support of her friends, family, and mentors was enough to keep her grounded. She pulled out her journal and began to write, something she hadn't done in ages. "Maybe I don't need to rush this. Maybe it's okay to take it one step at a time." She closed the journal, feeling at peace. The next day, Ellie made a decision. She would continue to pursue her work, but she would also allow herself time to just be a kid. She would learn to enjoy the journey, not just the destination. And with that, the pressure she'd been feeling seemed to lighten. Ellie's newfound balance was short-lived. Just as she was beginning to adjust to the demands of fame, a new and unexpected challenge emerged. It started with an anonymous email. "We have your work. Stop pretending to be the inventor of the energy device, or we will release everything to the public." Ellie stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She reread the message, certain she was missing something. Who would send such a message? And why? The email included a photo of a schematic drawing, one that was almost identical to her device's design, but with a few key differences. At the bottom, there was a note. "We know who really made this device. If you don't want your reputation ruined, stop now." Ellie's hands trembled as she passed the phone to Rachel. "Mom, what is this?" Rachel scanned the email quickly, her face hardening. "It's a threat, Ellie. Someone's trying to discredit your work." Ellie's mind raced. Who would want to destroy everything she had worked for? And why now, after all the success? Rachel hugged her tightly. "Don't worry. We'll handle this. This is just a bump in the road." That evening, Ellie sat down with Elon Musk and the Tesla team to discuss the situation. Elon had always been straightforward with her, but this time his expression was unusually serious. "This isn't just about protecting your invention, Ellie," Elon said. "It's about protecting your integrity. The world is watching. and there will always be people who want to tear you down. But we've got your back. Ellie nodded, trying to mask her anxiety. I don't understand. Why would someone do this? Elon leaned forward. It's possible that someone from within the industry feels threatened by your success. Or maybe they just want to take credit for your idea. Either way, we need to investigate and make sure this doesn't affect your progress. The next few days were a blur. The Tesla team worked around the clock to verify the authenticity of the email and determine who was behind the threat. Meanwhile, Ellie found it harder to focus on her work. The constant worry about someone sabotaging her invention consumed her thoughts. During one meeting, Ellie sat quietly, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. She felt like she was sinking under the weight of it all. Sophia, noticing Ellie's distress, pulled her aside. Hey, you're not alone in this. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Ellie tried to smile. I don't know if I'm cut out for this. It feels like every time I take a step forward, something pulls me back. Sophia placed a hand on her shoulder. That's the reality of being a pioneer. You're going to face obstacles, but that doesn't mean you give up. It means you get stronger. Ellie looked up at Sophia, feeling a flicker of hope. Thanks, Sophia. As the days passed, the situation grew more complicated. The anonymous emails kept coming, each more threatening than the last. The design flaws mentioned in the emails weren't legitimate, just deliberate attempts to discredit Ellie's work. But the constant stress was starting to take a toll on her. Ellie felt trapped. Her trust in others, especially those close to her, began to waver. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, maybe even within Tesla, was behind the emails. To escape the pressure, Ellie withdrew further into her work. She spent hours in the lab, tinkering with the prototype, trying to perfect it. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop thinking about the threats. One afternoon, as Ellie was working late in the lab, she received a phone call from Marco. Ellie, we need to talk, Marco said urgently. Ellie hesitated. What's wrong? I've been hearing things. Some of the team at school, well, they're talking about your invention. They're saying that you didn't really invent it, that someone else did the work for you. Ellie felt her stomach drop. Who's saying that? I don't know, Marco said, but I've heard it from a few different people. It's starting to spread. Ellie felt the walls closing in. Was this part of the campaign to ruin her? Had someone at school caught wind of the controversy? I need to figure out who's behind this, Ellie said, her voice tight. I know, but please, don't do it alone, Marco pleaded. You've got us, Ellie. We'll help you. The next day, Ellie met with Elon and the Tesla team again. This time, they had discovered something alarming. The schematic drawing in the email was traced from a design stolen years ago. The person behind the email wasn't just trying to discredit Ellie. They were trying to steal her invention. Elon's voice was calm but firm. We've tracked down the source of the schematic. It's someone who used to work with us. They're trying to sabotage your work and claim it as their own. Ellie felt a wave of relief mixed with anger. So it's true. Someone's trying to take credit for everything I've done. We'll handle it, Ellie, Elon reassured her. We'll protect your intellectual property and make sure the world knows you're the true inventor. But Ellie still felt unsettled. The person behind this sabotage was someone from within the industry, someone with influence. Could it be someone she knew? As Ellie stared at the email once again, she made a vow to herself. She wouldn't let anyone take her hard work away. She had fought too long and too hard to get here. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. And with the support of her family, friends, and mentors, she was ready to fight back. Ellie's resolve grew stronger with each passing day. Now that she knew the source of the threats, her focus shifted entirely to uncovering the identity of the person behind the sabotage. She wasn't going to let her hard work and dreams be taken away so easily. Elon, who had been investigating the origins of the stolen schematic, gathered the team in a secure meeting. The mood was tense, but there was a sense of determination in the air. We've traced the origins of the design to a former Tesla employee, someone who had access to our early research, Elon explained. We believe they're using this knowledge to discredit Ellie and take credit for her work. Ellie's heart raced. Who is it? Do you know their name? Elon nodded. We're still gathering concrete evidence, but we have a strong lead. This person goes by the name Thomas Calloway. He was a senior engineer here at Tesla, but was let go after a series of questionable actions. It seems he's resurfaced and is now trying to take advantage of your success, Ellie. Ellie's eyes narrowed. So, he's been planning this for a while, trying to destroy everything I've built. Rachel placed a comforting hand on her daughter's shoulder. We're not going to let him succeed. We'll make sure the truth comes out. But Ellie wasn't so sure. While she appreciated the support, a nagging feeling of doubt lingered. Thomas Callaway hadn't just stolen a design. He had infiltrated her life in a way she never expected. If he was truly behind the sabotage, he had to have more up his sleeve than just a stolen schematic. Over the next few days, Ellie, Elon, and the Tesla team worked tirelessly to gather evidence against Thomas. They combed through emails, designs, and old project files, piecing together a timeline of his actions. It became clear that he had been plotting his move for months. Meanwhile, Ellie found herself questioning everything. Could someone she worked with so closely be behind the attacks? Was there anyone else who might have been complicit in his plans? She needed answers, and she needed them fast. One evening, as Ellie was poring over documents in her lab, a message popped up on her computer. It was an encrypted email, with no sender name or subject. Hesitant, Ellie clicked open the message. It contained a single line of text. You're not the only one who can change the world, Ellie. You're about to learn just how much power I have. Ellie's pulse quickened. The message was a direct threat. It wasn't just about stealing her work. It was about showing her that Thomas had control over her future. He wasn't going to stop until he had destroyed her reputation completely. Ellie immediately forwarded the email to Elon, who replied just minutes later. We'll trace this, Elon assured her. He's getting desperate. It's only a matter of time before we have him cornered. But Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. This wasn't just a personal vendetta. Thomas was using her to make a statement that no one, not even a young prodigy like Ellie, could stand in the way of someone like him. The next day, Ellie went to the Tesla headquarters with a new plan in mind. She wasn't going to wait around for someone to save her. She was going to confront Thomas herself. I want to go after him, Ellie told Elon when they met in the boardroom. I want to talk to him face to face. Maybe he'll back down if he knows I'm not afraid. Elon hesitated, clearly concerned. Ellie, this is dangerous. He's not someone you can negotiate with. I don't want to negotiate, Ellie replied firmly. I want to stop him. I've been running from this fear long enough. I need to face it. Rachel, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. If you're going to confront him, you're not doing it alone. We're all in this together, Ellie. Sophia and Marco were there too, supporting Ellie's decision. They knew that this wasn't just about saving her invention anymore. It was about reclaiming her future, her reputation, and her sense of self. Ellie stood up tall, ready to face whatever came next. Let's do this. The team tracked down Thomas Callaway's last known location, a small office building on the outskirts of town. They planned their move carefully, ensuring that they had all the evidence needed to expose him. Ellie couldn't help but feel a rush of nervous excitement. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for. When they arrived, they found Thomas in a cluttered office, sitting behind a desk filled with papers and old schematics. He didn't look surprised to see them. In fact, he smiled darkly as he looked at Ellie. So, the prodigy finally shows up, Thomas said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I have to admit, I'm impressed, but you're too late. The world already believes in me. Ellie stepped forward, refusing to let his words rattle her. The world might believe in you, but you've been lying to them. This isn't your invention, it's mine. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. Thomas's smile faltered, and for the first time, Ellie saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. You think you can beat me? He sneered. You're just a little girl playing in a man's world. You can't handle the pressure. It's only a matter of time before you're exposed for what you really are, a fraud. Ellie stood her ground. I've never been a fraud, Thomas. But you? You've stolen everything I've worked for, and I'm done letting you destroy it. The confrontation was intense, but with Elon and the Tesla team standing behind her, Ellie felt invincible. She wasn't just fighting for her invention anymore. She was fighting for herself, her truth, and her future. The tension in the room was palpable, each word from Thomas cutting through the silence like a knife. Ellie's heart raced, but her resolve remained strong. She wasn't going to let this man, who had stolen from her, intimidate her any longer. Thomas rose from his chair, his expression hardening. You think you can just waltz in here and take everything from me? This isn't just about the invention, Ellie. This is about power. You have no idea how much more is at stake here. Ellie held her ground, taking a deep breath before speaking. I don't need to understand your power. I only need to understand my truth, and the truth is, I invented that device. I deserve credit for my work. Thomas chuckled darkly. Credit? You think credit matters in the grand scheme of things? The world doesn't care about your little project. They care about results. And you, Ellie, are nothing but a stepping stone for people like me. The insult hit harder than she expected, but Ellie didn't flinch. She remembered the sleepless nights spent refining her designs, the long hours working through failure after failure. All of that had led her to this moment. I'm not a stepping stone, Ellie said, her voice steady. I'm the future. Rachel stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. You're wrong, Thomas. You've underestimated Ellie. She's more than just a young genius. She's a force that you can't control. And we're going to make sure everyone knows the truth. Thomas's eyes narrowed as he realized they weren't backing down. He stepped toward the desk, his hand hovering over a drawer as if considering something. But before he could make a move, Elon spoke sharply. Don't even think about it, Elon warned. You're done, Thomas. This ends today. For a brief moment, there was silence. Just the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Then, with a slow and deliberate motion, Thomas dropped his hand from the drawer, his defiance slipping away. You think you've won? He asked, his voice quieter now. You think this is over? You have no idea what I'm capable of. The system is bigger than all of you. Ellie's mind raced. This wasn't just about his personal vendetta. It was clear now that Thomas was part of something much larger, an unseen network trying to hold on to power by any means necessary. But Ellie wasn't backing down. She'd come too far. No, Ellie said, locking eyes with him. You've underestimated what I'm capable of. I'm not afraid of you anymore. And I'm not backing down. I've built something real, something that can change the world. And I will make sure it's recognized for what it truly is. The room was quiet as Thomas processed her words. The silence stretched on, and for a moment, Ellie thought he might strike back. But instead, he let out a long sigh, slumping back into his chair. You're making a big mistake, Ellie, he muttered. But Ellie didn't care about his threats anymore. She was done being afraid. She was done letting others dictate her future. With a final glance at Thomas, she turned to Elon, Rachel, and the team. Let's finish this, she said, her voice filled with determination. Over the following days, the evidence they had gathered became more than just a trail of threats. It was a solid case against Thomas and his network. Ellie's team worked tirelessly to expose the truth, reaching out to the right people, uncovering connections between Thomas and certain influential figures who had been complicit in his schemes. The public began to take notice. News outlets started to report on the story, not just of Ellie's innovation, but of the lengths to which people like Thomas would go to stop her. The more the truth came to light, the more people stood by Ellie's side. But there was still one final hurdle to clear. The threat of Thomas and his allies loomed large, and Ellie knew that just because the truth was out, it didn't mean the battle was over. A week later, Ellie stood on stage at a global technology conference, addressing an audience of thousands. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked out over the sea of faces. This was the moment she had been working toward, and it was finally within reach. Elon Musk once told me that the future belongs to those who dare to dream and do, Ellie began, her voice steady but filled with passion. I've learned that the only thing standing between us and the future is the fear of failure. And we can't let that fear control us. I didn't invent this technology to change the world for the better. I did it because I believe we all have the power to make a difference. Together. The crowd erupted into applause, and Ellie felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't just the applause that mattered. It was the understanding that she had finally found her place in the world. The world had finally acknowledged her for who she was, a young woman with a vision, a voice, and a future. As Ellie left the stage, she was surrounded by friends, family, and mentors who had supported her through it all. Rachel hugged her tightly, tears in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you, Ellie." "You did it," Sophia said with a smile. "You showed them all." Elon clapped her on the back. "The world is just getting started, Ellie. You've got a lot more to give." Ellie smiled, a sense of peace finally settling in. She had faced the darkness, confronted the people who tried to tear her down, and emerged stronger than ever. The battle wasn't over yet, but Ellie knew one thing for sure. She would never stop fighting for what was hers. The days after Ellie's triumphant speech felt like a blur. She had faced her fears, stood up to Thomas, and had come out on top. The world now knew her name, and her invention was being hailed as a breakthrough that could change the way people thought about clean energy. Yet, despite the recognition, Ellie couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was still unresolved. She had won the battle against Thomas Callaway, but there were still so many unanswered questions about the network of people he had been working with. Was it really over? Had she truly rid herself of all threats? Or was this just the calm before another storm? Ellie sat alone in her lab one evening, staring at the blueprints for her next big project. The walls around her were lined with various prototypes and technical diagrams, tangible evidence of her brilliance. But despite all the success, something gnawed at her. "You can't let your guard down now," she murmured to herself. "Not when everything's on the line." Just then, her phone buzzed on the desk, breaking her train of thought. She picked it up to find a message from Elon. "We need to talk. Something's come up." Ellie's stomach dropped. She quickly texted back. "Is everything okay?" "No, but it will be. Come to my office, please." When Ellie arrived at Elon's office, she was greeted by an air of urgency. Elon and a few members of the Tesla security team were gathered around a large screen, showing a set of encrypted messages. "Ellie, this is serious," Elon said, motioning for her to sit. "We've just uncovered something that could put you, and everything you've worked for, in danger again." Ellie's heart raced. "What's going on?" Elon leaned forward, his face serious. "It seems that Thomas Callaway wasn't acting alone. We've traced a series of encrypted communications back to a group of investors, powerful people who have interests in monopolizing energy technologies. They were backing Callaway's attempt to sabotage you." Ellie's mind raced as the implications of Elon's words sunk in. She had known that Thomas was just one piece of the puzzle, but this was something bigger. A network of investors trying to suppress her work? It was the kind of thing she had only heard about in conspiracy theories. "Who are these investors?" Ellie asked, her voice low. "We don't know yet," Elon said, his expression tight. "The messages are heavily encrypted, but we've been working with some of the best in the field to crack the code. We'll get answers, but it's going to take time." Ellie nodded, her mind already working at full speed. She had always known that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but this was a whole new level of threat. The realization hit her hard. She wasn't just fighting for recognition anymore. She was fighting for her future, and for the future of everyone who believed in her work. The next few days were filled with a constant stream of meetings, security briefings, and late-night strategy sessions. Ellie spent every spare moment in her lab, poring over her designs while also helping Elon and the team track down the mysterious investors. It was grueling work, but Ellie refused to back down. She had already come so far, and there was no turning back now. As the investigation progressed, they finally began to make headway. The encrypted messages had led them to a shadowy group of investors known as the Consortium, a secretive collective of high-powered businesspeople with deep pockets and even deeper motives. They controlled much of the energy market, and they were determined to keep it that way. "This is bigger than we thought," Elon said during one of their strategy sessions. "The Consortium has a lot of influence, and they won't hesitate to crush anyone who gets in their way. We've got to be careful." Ellie looked up at him, her determination unwavering. "I'm not afraid of them. I've faced worse. We'll expose them just like we exposed Callaway." But even as she said the words, Ellie couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The Consortium was a force unlike anything she had encountered before. These were people who didn't just have the power to sabotage her. They had the power to destroy everything she had worked for. Days turned into weeks, and as Ellie continued her work, the pressure began to mount. Every decision she made felt like it could be the one that would either save or ruin her future. She spent sleepless nights in her lab, working alongside Elon and the security team to gather more evidence against the consortium. But despite their progress, Ellie knew they had to move quickly. The longer they waited, the more time the consortium had to cover their tracks. Finally, they received a breakthrough. One of the investors, the elusive Alexander Grant, had slipped up. His communications had been intercepted, revealing his connection to Thomas Calloway's sabotage and his attempts to undermine Ellie's work. The evidence was undeniable. "We've got him," Elon said, a hint of triumph in his voice. "Now we can take this public. The world will know who's been pulling the strings behind all of this." Ellie felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of wariness. The consortium wouldn't go down without a fight, and she knew they would stop at nothing to protect their interests. "This isn't over," Ellie said quietly. "Not yet." The day they presented the evidence to the public was one of the most tense moments of Ellie's life. The world's media gathered to hear the explosive story that would shake the very foundations of the energy industry. Ellie stood alongside Elon, ready to tell the truth, to expose the consortium for what they were, a group of power-hungry investors who had tried to destroy her career. As the press conference began, Ellie spoke clearly and with conviction, laying out the evidence for the world to see. The room fell silent as the truth unfolded before their eyes. And then, just as the storm seemed to be calming, the unexpected happened. A phone rang, cutting through the silence. Ellie's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the number on the caller ID. It was a number she knew all too well, one that belonged to Thomas Calloway. The game was far from over. The phone rang once, then twice. Ellie's heart raced as she stared at the caller ID. It was Thomas Calloway, the man who had tried to ruin her career, who had been part of the scheme to silence her. What could he want now? "Are you going to answer that?" Elon's voice cut through her thoughts, his brow furrowing in concern. The room was filled with journalists, reporters, and cameras, and Ellie knew that whatever happened next, it would be under a microscope. Ellie hesitated for a moment, then made a snap decision. She grabbed the phone and answered it, her voice steady but tinged with suspicion. "Ellie," Thomas's voice came through the receiver, smooth and calm, almost eerily so. "I think we need to talk." Her stomach churned. "You've got nothing left to say, Thomas. You've been exposed. You and your little consortium are finished." There was a long pause before he responded. "I'm not calling to apologize, Ellie. I'm calling to warn you. You think you've won, but you've only scratched the surface. They're coming for you." Ellie's pulse quickened. "Who? The consortium?" "No," Thomas said with a dark laugh. "Someone far more dangerous than them. People who have more power than you can imagine. And they don't take kindly to people like you trying to disrupt their plans." Ellie's mind raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I'm not afraid of you or anyone else you work with, Thomas. This ends now." Thomas chuckled again, the sound sending a chill down her spine. "You still don't get it, do you? You think exposing the consortium is the end of this story. But the truth is, you're just a pawn in a much bigger game. They'll stop at nothing to keep their secrets safe." Ellie clenched her jaw. She had already fought so hard, and now she was being told that it was all just the beginning of something darker. Who are these people? What do they want? "That's something you'll learn soon enough," Thomas replied cryptically. "Just remember, Ellie, nothing in this world is ever as simple as it seems." The line went dead with a soft click, leaving Ellie standing there, gripping the phone, her mind spinning. Elon stepped closer, his face serious. "What did he say?" Ellie slowly lowered the phone. "He's warning me. He says that exposing the consortium isn't the end of the game. He claims there's something, or someone, far more dangerous coming after me. People with more power than we could imagine." Elon's expression darkened. "This is bigger than we thought. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." The weight of his words hung in the air. Ellie had thought she was prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. But this was different. If Thomas's warning was true, then she was facing an enemy that she couldn't even begin to comprehend. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Ellie and Elon met with security experts, hired additional protection, and even began working with a team of cyber specialists to secure her data. But despite all the precautions, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every time she stepped out in public, she felt eyes on her, and every time her phone buzzed with a new message or call, her stomach twisted with unease. It wasn't until late one evening, while Ellie was working in her lab, that the situation took an unexpected turn. The lights flickered, and the hum of the machines suddenly stopped. She looked around, confused, before her phone buzzed again. The message was from an unknown number. "You're not safe. Leave the lab now." Ellie's heart raced. She scanned the room, looking for any sign of intrusion, but everything seemed normal. Still, she trusted her instincts. Grabbing her phone and a few essential items, she headed toward the exit. As she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her every move. Just as she reached the door, she heard a loud crash from the other side of the building. The sound of something heavy being thrown against the walls made her jump, her breath catching in her throat. She knew she wasn't alone. Turning quickly, Ellie ran in the opposite direction, heading for the back exit of the lab. She had to get out. She had to escape whatever trap had been set for her. As she burst through the door into the alley behind the building, her phone rang again. She didn't hesitate to answer. "Elon," she said, her voice urgent. "Something's happening. I need help." "Stay where you are." Elon's voice crackled through the line, his tone sharp. "We've got eyes on you. Get to the nearest safe house. We'll be there in a few minutes." Ellie didn't wait for further instructions. She sprinted down the alley, her heart pounding in her chest. But as she rounded the corner, she froze. A black van was parked at the end of the alley, and two figures were moving toward her with determined steps. Ellie's instincts kicked in, and she ducked behind a dumpster, her breath coming in short gasps as she tried to calm herself. The figures moved closer, and Ellie held her breath. She couldn't see their faces, but she knew they weren't here for a friendly chat. They were here for her. She had to act fast. Ellie pulled out her phone and sent a quick message to Elon. "I'm not safe. They're here. Get out here now." Just as she hit send, she heard footsteps approaching. She had moments, maybe seconds, to make her move. With adrenaline coursing through her veins, Ellie bolted from her hiding place, running as fast as she could. The figures pursued her, but she was faster. She could hear their footsteps growing louder as they chased her down the narrow alley. But Ellie's determination drove her forward. She wouldn't let them catch her. Not now. Not when she had come so far. Ellie's heart pounded as she dashed through the alleyway, her feet pounding against the pavement, every muscle screaming for rest. The sound of footsteps grew louder behind her, closer, faster. She didn't dare look back, knowing that would only slow her down. Her mind raced with panic, but she refused to let fear control her. She had come too far to be stopped now. The dim lights of the alley offered little protection. She knew she had to get to a main road, where she could blend in with the crowd, but the figures pursuing her were relentless. They were closing in, and Ellie's options were running out. She made a sharp turn at the next intersection, narrowly avoiding a dumpster, her breath ragged. She couldn't afford to be caught, not with everything at stake. She thought of Elon, her friends, and the team who had been working so tirelessly with her. The moment she got out of this, she'd make sure they were all safe. But first, she had to survive. "Keep running," she whispered to herself, pushing harder with every stride. Just keep running. From a distance, Elon and his security team had been tracking Ellie's movements in real time, trying to anticipate her next move. The moment he received Ellie's urgent text, he activated the backup plans they'd set up in case of emergency. The last thing he wanted was for Ellie to be caught, especially now that she was exposed to forces much larger than she had anticipated. "Elon, she's only a few blocks away." One of his team members called out from the vehicle. "We've got a visual on her. We're closing in." But just as they were about to reach her location, the van with the attackers seemed to multiply in their presence. More figures emerged from the shadows, cutting off every possible escape route. Elon's gut twisted. These weren't just hired goons. Whoever was behind this had resources and intelligence to track Ellie's every move. "We're not going to make it in time," one of the security officers called. "Stay on her." "I'm going in on foot," Elon snapped, grabbing his jacket and storming out of the vehicle. Ellie could see the main street ahead, a glimmer of safety, but the figures were still on her heels, gaining ground with every second. Her breath burned in her chest as she pushed her legs harder. A van sped past the intersection in front of her, its windows blackened, but Ellie barely had time to notice. She skidded to a halt just in time, nearly colliding with a passing pedestrian who screamed in surprise. Ellie's eyes darted to her left and right. There was nowhere to hide now. "Don't stop. Don't stop," she told herself. Her mind reeled as she searched for any escape route, but the alleyways behind her had already closed in. She could hear the men shouting to each other, coordinating their pursuit. Then, just as Ellie rounded a corner, she collided with a figure emerging from a side alley. She stumbled backward, her eyes wide as she recognized the person standing before her. "Elon!" she gasped, relief flooding through her. Elon, breathless but determined, grabbed her arm, pulling her into an adjacent building without a word. His security team wasn't far behind, but they needed cover, and the last thing they wanted was for the attackers to know they were coming. They ducked into the building, a small cafe that had long closed for the night. Ellie slammed the door behind them, her pulse still racing. "You okay?" Elon asked, his voice tense but controlled. Ellie nodded, though she felt anything but okay. She could still hear the men shouting outside, their voices muffled through the thick door. "They're coming," she said, her voice shaking. "They won't stop. They'll find me, Elon." Elon looked at her, his gaze serious and unwavering. "We'll keep you safe, but we need answers. Whoever's behind this, they've got a reason for going after you. And I don't think it's just about your work anymore." Ellie's stomach churned as the weight of his words settled in. Elon was right. If this wasn't about her research anymore, then what were they after? What did they want with her? Outside, the pursuit had slowed, but the danger was far from over. Elon's team had set up a perimeter, but the attackers had likely already realized that they'd been outwitted and would soon be regrouping. Ellie and Elon had little time to plan their next move. "We need to get to the safe house," one of Elon's team members said, speaking through his earpiece. "It's the only place we can be sure they won't find us." "No," Ellie said quickly. "We can't go there. I don't know who we can trust anymore. The consortium? These people, whoever they are, they're too powerful. We need to expose them now, while we still have a chance." Elon's expression hardened, his gaze never leaving hers. "You're right, but we need to be smart about it." Ellie's mind raced as she processed the situation. She could feel her brain working overtime, sifting through the possibilities. The truth was, she couldn't hide forever. She had come this far by fighting back, not by running. If the world was going to know the full extent of the conspiracy that had been exposed, she had to make sure the people responsible were brought to light once and for all. "We go public," Ellie said decisively. "We leak everything we've got. If they want to shut me down, we make it impossible for them to do it quietly." Elon's eyes narrowed in agreement. "But we need to be careful. One wrong move, and it could be over." As the hours ticked by, Ellie and Elon carefully mapped out their next steps. The world knew about the consortium, but they didn't know the full story, who was pulling the strings behind the scenes and why. Ellie had to make sure she was ahead of the game, and this time, there would be no turning back. In the distance, the sound of sirens began to grow louder. The authorities were coming, and Ellie knew this was her last chance. She took a deep breath, wiped the sweat from her brow, and set her eyes on the future. The battle for her life and her legacy was far from over, but one thing was certain. She wouldn't stop until the truth came to light. The tension in the room was palpable as Ellie and Elon sat at the small cafe table, their minds racing with the weight of their next move. They had agreed on a risky plan, one that would expose everything they knew to the public. It wasn't a decision Ellie took lightly, but it was the only way to ensure that those who had been manipulating her, the consortium, and the unknown powerful forces behind them would be brought to justice. If they succeeded, their lives would never be the same. "We need to get the right information to the right people," Ellie said, her voice steady despite the anxiety churning inside her. "We can't afford to trust anyone in the usual circles. The media's been compromised. We need to go directly to the public." Elon nodded, his expression unreadable. I've got a few trusted contacts in high places, but you're right. If we give this information to the wrong people, it could disappear. Ellie pulled out her laptop, opening up the encrypted files she'd been working on for the past few months, evidence that the consortium's control extended far beyond her initial understanding. Names, locations, high-level meetings. She had everything they needed to expose the conspiracy. But the challenge now wasn't in the data. It was in getting it into the right hands before the people hunting her could stop them. We need to go to the media directly, Elon said, his voice firm. I have a secure channel that's been used before for situations like this. We'll reach out to investigative journalists. But there's no time to waste. They'll be coming after you again soon, Ellie. Ellie nodded, feeling the weight of his words sink in. They weren't just fighting for the truth anymore. They were fighting for their lives. Meanwhile, outside, Ellie's attackers had regrouped. They weren't amateurs. These were highly trained operatives, and they had one mission: find Ellie and silence her for good. It wasn't just about protecting their secrets now. It was about sending a message. In the shadows, a black SUV idled, its engine purring as two figures inside analyzed the situation. One of them spoke in a low voice. We need to make sure she doesn't get to the media. Do whatever it takes. Bring her in, but keep it clean. We don't need a mess. His companion, a tall man with cold eyes, nodded. Understood. She won't get the chance to speak to anyone. Back in the cafe, Ellie and Elon were preparing to make their move. The journalist they had chosen, a well-known investigative reporter named Maria Clark, had been briefed on the situation and agreed to meet them at a secure location. Maria was known for her no-nonsense attitude and her ability to get the truth to the public, no matter the cost. Ellie had worked with her once before and knew she was the right person for the job. As the minutes ticked by, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her instincts were screaming at her. Every time the door to the cafe opened, she would glance up, expecting to see someone she knew, but it was always just another customer. Still, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she couldn't shake the unease. Elon, she whispered, leaning in closer to him. Something's not right. I think they're closer than we thought. Elon's gaze flicked to the door, then back to her. Stay calm. We'll be ready. I've arranged backup for when we move. But Ellie wasn't so sure. The clock was ticking, and the closer they got to their goal, the more danger they found themselves in. She had already been warned by Thomas. She had already faced the deadly silence of those who didn't want the truth to come out. This time, she couldn't afford to be caught off guard. It was nearly midnight when Maria arrived. She was dressed in a plain black jacket, her eyes scanning the room before she spotted Ellie and Elon in the back corner. She approached them without hesitation, her eyes betraying none of the tension that Ellie could feel hanging in the air. You're sure this is all real? Maria asked, after brief introductions. Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of doubt in her eyes. This is a lot of information to process, Ellie. Ellie nodded. It's all true. I've verified every detail. The consortium, the people behind them, they've been pulling the strings for years. They've got their fingers in every major institution, every powerful corporation. But what's even worse, they're not alone. There's a bigger force behind them, a shadow organization that's been controlling the game from the start. Maria leaned forward, clearly intrigued but cautious. And you think they'll just let this go public? Ellie met her gaze, unwavering. No, I know they won't. But if we don't act now, we'll never have the chance again. We have to expose them, Maria. The world needs to know who's behind the manipulation. Maria was silent for a moment, considering the magnitude of the decision. She looked down at the files Ellie had brought. Every document, every piece of evidence that proved what Ellie was saying was true. The room was heavy with the unspoken knowledge that if Maria took this step, there would be no turning back. Finally, Maria spoke. All right, I'm in. But we'll need more than just this data. We'll need interviews, corroboration, evidence that's indisputable. Ellie nodded. I can do that. I have everything ready. But we need to move quickly. They'll come for me soon. As if on cue, Ellie's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a single message from an unknown number. You've made a mistake, Ellie. You should have stayed hidden. Her blood ran cold. She looked at Elon, her heart racing. They weren't just up against the consortium anymore. Whoever was behind this was watching, and they were ready to strike. "We have to go," she said urgently. "Now." Maria's eyes widened. "What is it? What's happening?" "Someone knows we're here," Ellie said, standing up and grabbing her bag. "They're coming for us." The three of them quickly moved toward the back exit, but as they opened the door, they were met with an unpleasant surprise. A group of men stood in the alley, blocking their way. "You're not going anywhere, Ellie," one of the men said, his voice cold and menacing. Elon stepped forward, his face hard with determination. "Stay back." Ellie's mind raced. They were trapped. The only option now was to fight back or find another way out. And she knew that in this moment, there was no turning back. The air outside the cafe was thick with tension as Ellie, Elon, and Maria found themselves cornered in the dimly lit alley. The men standing before them were no ordinary thugs. They were well-trained, their movements calculated, and their expressions cold. Ellie's heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. Her mind raced through every possible escape route, every contingency plan they discussed, but none seemed viable. Not with the men blocking the way, and the sound of more footsteps closing in from the other end of the alley. "We don't want any trouble," Elon said, stepping between Ellie and the men, his voice firm and controlled. His security team had been compromised, and for the first time, Ellie realized they were alone in this. The man who had spoken earlier, the one with the steely eyes, grinned coldly. "Too bad. You've already made trouble for yourselves. You've seen too much." Ellie glanced at Elon, her mind racing. There was no way they could fight all these men and still get out alive. They needed to think fast. "Maria," she whispered, "can you contact your network? Get someone to move fast? We need a distraction." Maria's eyes flicked nervously around the alley, but she nodded. "I'll try, but it won't be easy. These guys are connected." Elon took a step forward, his face hardening. "Listen to me. You can walk away from this. There's no need for more violence." The man with the cold eyes didn't flinch. "Too late for that, Musk. We don't let loose ends go untied." Ellie's blood ran cold at the mention of Elon's name. These people weren't just after her. They were after him too. They knew who he was. And that made them all the more dangerous. The man signaled to his associates, and they started to advance, closing in like predators circling their prey. Ellie could feel the walls closing in, the air thick with impending violence. But she wasn't about to let them take her down without a fight. She reached into her bag, her fingers brushing against the device Elon had given her, the one that could trigger a series of encrypted communications designed to expose the consortium's activities to the world. "Get ready," Ellie muttered to Elon, her voice steady despite the storm of fear inside her. "This is our only shot." Without another word, she pressed the button on the device, sending the encrypted message to Maria's network. It was a signal, a call for help, and they were about to see just how far-reaching the plan had been. On the other side of the city, a team of hackers and journalists, led by Maria's underground network, began their preparations. The moment they received the signal from Ellie, everything went into motion. The encrypted files that Ellie had sent out would hit the media within minutes, exposing everything about the consortium, its operations, and the global figures pulling its strings. But as Maria had warned, the clock was ticking. If they couldn't get Ellie out of there soon, the plan would be worthless. Back in the alley, the first of the attackers lunged toward Ellie, but Elon was quicker. With a swift motion, he knocked the man off balance, sending him crashing to the ground. It wasn't enough. The others were already closing in. "Move," Elon shouted, grabbing Ellie's arm and pulling her toward the side of the alley where a fire escape ladder clanged above them. It was their only chance. But before they could reach it, one of the men grabbed Ellie's arm, yanking her back. "You're not going anywhere," he hissed, his grip like iron. Ellie's heart pounded as she twisted in his grasp, but he held firm. Just as she was about to scream for help, a burst of movement distracted their assailant. Maria, using the distraction, rushed forward and kicked the man in the back of his knee, forcing him to stumble. Ellie pulled away and darted toward Elon, who was already scaling the ladder with ease. "Come on," Elon shouted down to her. Ellie took a deep breath and grabbed the rung just below Elon's. But before she could make it up, a heavy hand gripped her ankle, dragging her back down. Panic surged through her, but she fought against it, kicking and twisting to free herself. From behind her, Maria's voice rang out. "Ellie, no." A loud crack echoed through the alley as one of the attackers slammed a baton against the metal ladder. The sound of metal bending rang in Ellie's ears, and the ladder wobbled under the force. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. If it fell now, they'd all be trapped. The man holding Ellie's ankle wrenched her back, pulling her toward him, but just as his hand tightened, there was a sudden roar of car engines. A convoy of vehicles screeched to a halt at the end of the alley. Ellie's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The cavalry had arrived. The attackers froze for just a moment, uncertainty flashing in their eyes. That was all it took. In that moment, Ellie broke free, using all her strength to scramble up the fire escape, finally reaching the rooftop just as the men rushed to regroup. On the ground, Maria's network was already in action. The hackers had infiltrated the communications of the attackers, triggering false alarms and disrupting their communication channels. Police vehicles appeared, their sirens blaring as backup teams flooded the alley. The consortium's operatives had underestimated the scale of Ellie's resistance, and now they were trapped in the spotlight. Breathing hard, Ellie and Elon reached the rooftop's edge, where a helicopter waited. Its rotors were already spinning, ready to take them to safety. Elon turned to Ellie, his face still tight with tension, but also a flash of relief. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You got the message out." Ellie, barely able to catch her breath, managed a small smile. "We're not done yet, Elon. We still have to finish what we started." As the helicopter lifted off, Ellie glanced down at the chaos below. She knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. The truth was out now, and nothing, not even the consortium, could stop it. But as they soared higher into the night sky, Ellie's thoughts turned to what lay ahead. They had exposed the shadows, but the people who thrived in those shadows were not going to go down without a fight. The war was just beginning. As the helicopter flew through the night sky, the hum of the rotors was a constant reminder that Ellie, Elon, and Maria were no longer just running. They were being hunted. The exposed conspiracy had sent shockwaves across the world, but with it came dangerous ramifications. Powerful people, whose very existence depended on secrecy, would stop at nothing to erase every trace of the truth. The city below was a blur of lights, but Ellie's mind was miles away, racing ahead to what was coming next. She glanced at Elon, his face illuminated by the flashing lights of the helicopter's dashboard, and felt the weight of their situation settle over her. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. Maria, who sat next to Ellie, was already typing furiously on her phone, coordinating with her network. "We've got a few journalists on the ground in major cities," Maria said, her tone focused, "but we need to keep moving. The first wave of information will be out in the next few hours, but they'll be coming after us soon." Ellie nodded, the urgency of their escape clear in her mind. The consortium's operatives would be combing through the media and contacts, trying to track every lead, every breadcrumb. They would use every resource to silence the whistleblowers and bring down anyone who dared defy them. "We're not safe anywhere," Ellie muttered, her gaze fixed on the dark expanse of the horizon. "They'll know where we are soon. We have to figure out our next move." Elon shifted in his seat, his brow furrowing as he thought. "I've already made arrangements for us to go off the grid. But first, we need to get the story out to the public. No more waiting." Maria looked up, her face resolute. "The world will know the truth. We can't let them control the narrative anymore. Once the story's hit, we can start gathering allies." Ellie could feel a sense of resolve settling in her chest. The battle for the truth was about to become global. There would be no hiding from the consequences, no erasing of the footprints they had left behind. This was their fight now, and they couldn't back down. As the helicopter began its descent toward a secluded safe house on the outskirts of the city, Ellie's phone buzzed. She glanced down at the screen to see a message from an unknown number. "You think you've won? The game is just beginning." Her pulse quickened. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. The helicopter touched down softly, and the crew quickly disembarked. The safe house was secluded, a modern, fortified compound hidden deep in the woods. The place was built for situations like this, secure, remote, and equipped with all the technology they would need to stay one step ahead. Elon led the way inside, but Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every room they entered felt like a potential trap, every shadow hiding something unknown. As they settled into the safe house, Ellie connected her laptop to a secure satellite network, watching as the first round of leaked information started to surface online. The world was starting to wake up. Maria paced the room, her phone glued to her ear as she checked in with her sources. "The media's starting to pick it up," she said, hanging up. "It's going viral." Ellie took a deep breath. She was grateful for the progress, but knew that this was just the beginning. The public's reaction would be swift, but it could go either way. There was no guarantee that everyone would believe the truth. The consortium had spent years manipulating information, controlling narratives, and shaping the way people saw the world. The battle for the truth was just beginning. Elon sat down across from her, his face more serious than ever. "We need to stay one step ahead of them. This information is going to make waves, but they won't let us get away with it. They'll fight back, and they'll use everything they've got." Ellie nodded, her eyes hardening with determination. "We've got to keep the pressure on. We need to find more allies, more people who've been hurt by the consortium. The truth will only survive if we have enough voices." Maria spoke up, her voice tinged with concern. "And we need to prepare for the retaliation. They've got resources, private armies, surveillance. We can't just hope they'll back down." Elon's jaw tightened. "We're not backing down. We'll expose them all." As the night wore on, the safe house grew quieter, each of them lost in their thoughts. The danger wasn't over. It had only just begun. But with each passing minute, they had made more progress in their fight against the system that had kept them under its thumb. Ellie couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, the images of the people they were fighting for flashed in her mind. Families who had been torn apart, individuals whose lives had been controlled by the unseen hands of the consortium. She couldn't forget what they had done, and she wouldn't rest until it was all exposed. She stood up from the desk and walked to the window, looking out into the dark night. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, it felt like everything had stopped, like the world was holding its breath. And then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed again. She grabbed it quickly, her heart racing as she saw the message. "They're coming for you. Get out now." Ellie's stomach dropped. This was it. The time for waiting was over. They had to move now. She turned back to Elon and Maria, who were deep in conversation. "We have to go. They found us." Outside, a black van screeched to a halt at the edge of the compound. Men in dark uniforms stepped out, their expressions cold and determined. They weren't here for a negotiation. They were here to silence the truth. Ellie's mind raced. They had no more time to strategize. They had no more time to prepare. They had to fight. The air around the safe house was thick with tension. Ellie's heart pounded as she moved swiftly to the back of the house, adrenaline surging through her veins. They had been found. Someone, somewhere, had tracked their every move. It wasn't just the consortium's operatives after them now. It was something much bigger. They were cornered, but for the first time, Ellie felt the clarity that came with knowing they were no longer alone in this fight. Elon, his face set in grim determination, rushed to the door. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Maria, can you get a signal out to the others?" Maria nodded, already tapping away at her phone. "I've already sent a distress signal. The plan's in motion, but we need to move quickly." Ellie grabbed her bag, checking the contents, her laptop, some emergency funds, and the encrypted flash drive that held the full extent of the evidence they'd uncovered. It was a small thing, but it held the power to bring down an empire, and it was their only leverage. The compound's defenses weren't much compared to the storm headed their way. Ellie knew they couldn't rely on technology alone to protect them. They needed a plan, fast. She looked at Elon. "Where's the escape route?" He pointed toward the back door, which led to a narrow trail through the woods. "It's a straight shot to a nearby town. We'll lay low there until we figure out our next move." But just as they were about to make their way out, the loud crackle of gunfire split the air. The sound was deafening, and the walls of the house seemed to tremble under the pressure. The first round of shots hit the windows, shattering glass and spraying shards across the room. "Go! Go!" Elon shouted, pulling Ellie by the arm as he dashed toward the door. Maria was already ahead, pushing open the back exit and leading the way down the narrow path. The forest around them was dark, the only light coming from the flashlights of the men closing in. They had been spotted. The consortium's forces were closing in from all sides, determined to wipe out their last remaining witnesses. The path through the woods was treacherous, and Ellie struggled to keep pace as they dodged branches and fallen trees. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and her heart was racing, not from the physical exertion, but from the weight of what was at stake. They were running for their lives, but they were also running for something much bigger, the truth. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a clearing. A small cabin stood in the distance, its lights flickering. It wasn't much, but it was a safe haven for now. Ellie felt a brief sense of relief, until she saw the black SUVs parked just ahead, blocking their escape. "We're trapped," Maria hissed, her voice tight with panic. But Ellie wasn't ready to give up. Not now. She turned to Elon, whose jaw was clenched as he surveyed their options. "There has to be another way. We can't just surrender." Elon's eyes met hers, his expression fierce. "We won't. We fight. We fight until we expose them all." The sound of footsteps grew louder, the men closing in. There was no more time for thinking, only acting. Ellie pulled the flash drive from her bag and held it up. "We have this. This is the key. We can't let them take it." Maria took a deep breath. "We'll get it out. We just need a distraction." The three of them crouched behind a large rock, their backs to the cabin as the sound of footsteps came closer. Ellie's mind raced, trying to think of a way to use the environment to their advantage. She couldn't afford to be caught now, not after everything they'd been through. The truth had to come out. Then, Ellie's eyes flicked to the trees surrounding them. There, nestled in the distance, she saw a shadow move. Someone else was out there. "Maria, can you get a message to them?" "We need backup now," Ellie whispered urgently. Maria nodded and quickly sent another message, her fingers moving with practiced speed. But the message wasn't just for help. It was for the team who had been tracking their every move. They needed a plan to divert the consortium's attention. Ellie felt the tension in the air, every nerve in her body on edge as the seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. The men had reached the clearing, their eyes scanning the surroundings. And then, as if on cue, a series of explosions rocked the ground. The earth trembled beneath their feet, and the men in front of them staggered back in shock. The distraction worked. "Go! Go now!" Maria shouted, her voice echoing across the clearing. Ellie and Elon wasted no time. They sprinted toward the cabin, with Maria trailing closely behind. The explosions had thrown their pursuers into chaos, and the sudden confusion bought them just enough time to reach the building's back entrance. Inside, the cabin was sparse, with only the bare essentials. It wasn't much, but it was better than being out in the open. Ellie slammed the door shut behind them, and for a moment, they caught their breath. "We've got a moment," Elon said, his eyes scanning the room. "But it won't last long. We need to make sure the flash drive gets to the right people. It's our only shot." Maria nodded, her expression grim. "I'll contact my people. They're on standby." Ellie felt her phone buzz in her pocket, and she pulled it out, reading the message on the screen. "You're not safe. Trust no one." Her stomach dropped. Who was warning them now? And who could they trust in this fight against the consortium? The cabin seemed to close in on them, the walls feeling more like a prison than a safe house. Ellie's mind churned as she tried to think of their next move. The truth was out now, but the war was far from over. The consortium had its claws in every part of society, and they wouldn't stop until every loose end was tied up. As they settled into the cabin for what could be their final stand, Ellie knew one thing for sure. They were far from finished. The storm was just beginning, and the world was about to witness the true power of the truth. The cabin, though small and rustic, was a haven for only a few fleeting moments. Ellie sat at the table, her mind racing as she reviewed the encrypted files on her laptop. The flash drive still sat in her hand, its weight a constant reminder of what was at stake. The consortium was relentless, but now that the world knew, they couldn't afford to stop. There was too much to lose. Elon and Maria were deep in conversation, strategizing their next move. The explosions outside had bought them precious time, but it wouldn't last. Ellie knew that every minute was critical. "Elon," she called softly, looking up from her laptop. "We need a backup plan. We can't trust anyone out there. They know too much about us now." Elon looked over, his face hard and determined. "I've got people in place. We've been careful, but we'll need more than just luck to stay ahead of them. If we're going to get this out to the right people, we have to move faster than they can track us." Maria nodded, her fingers still dancing over her phone as she relayed information. "I've sent the message to the safe houses we've set up. We're waiting for confirmation from a few key contacts, but we're not out of the woods yet." Ellie's eyes flicked to the window. The woods surrounding the cabin were eerily quiet now, but she knew it was only a matter of time before the consortium's forces would close in again. They wouldn't stop. This was no longer just a fight for survival. This was a fight for the future. Maria paused, her expression sharpening. "We have a problem. One of my contacts just sent a warning. There's a leak within our circle. Someone we trusted has been compromised." Ellie felt her chest tighten. "How bad is it?" Maria's jaw clenched. "Bad enough that they're already tracking us. The plan to distribute the files, it's been compromised." Elon stood up abruptly, his eyes flashing with determination. "Then we do it ourselves. We'll go directly to the media. If they want to silence us, they'll have to do it in front of the whole world." Ellie nodded, her mind racing. They could go public with everything. Expose the corruption, the manipulation, the lives ruined by the consortium's grip, but that would make them targets. If they went down that route, there would be no turning back. But what was the alternative? Let the truth be buried, allowing the consortium to continue its reign of power and control? She couldn't live with that. "Elon," Ellie said, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside her, "we're going to need more than just media coverage. We need a movement. We need people in the streets demanding justice." Maria raised an eyebrow. "A revolution?" Ellie met her gaze, the fire in her eyes undeniable. "A revolution?" The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Elon worked the phone, calling in favors from people he trusted. Some inside tech, others in media, and a few well-placed political allies. Maria tapped into her network, reaching out to activists, journalists, and anyone she thought could help amplify their message. Ellie, meanwhile, kept her focus on the laptop, preparing a public statement to accompany the release of the files. She couldn't just expose the truth. They needed to create a groundswell of support. If they wanted to bring the consortium down, they needed to make sure their actions had a ripple effect. The files on the flash drive were only part of the equation. The world had to be ready to fight alongside them. The storm outside had picked up, the wind howling through the trees as rain began to fall in sheets. Ellie could hear the crackle of thunder in the distance, as if the heavens themselves were warning them of the chaos to come. Then, the door to the cabin suddenly burst open, and a figure appeared in the doorway, a shadowy silhouette against the dim light. Ellie's heart skipped a beat, and her first instinct was to grab the nearest object for defense. But as the figure stepped into the room, her tension eased. It was only one person, an ally, not an enemy. The person was tall, with sharp features and a quiet demeanor. Ellie recognized them immediately. It was Lucas, one of Elon's trusted contacts. He was a former intelligence officer who had left the system years ago, disillusioned with the corruption he had witnessed firsthand. His help had been invaluable in the past, but now his arrival felt more like a lifeline. "You're still alive," Ellie said, relieved but cautious. "I thought you'd gone off the grid by now." Lucas smiled faintly, stepping further into the room and closing the door behind him. "I was just about to, but then I heard the news. And I knew you'd need help. We don't have much time. They've already set up a blockade around this area. They'll be here within the hour." Elon stood up and made his way over to Lucas. "We've got to act fast. We're releasing the files. The public needs to see everything." Lucas nodded, but his expression remained serious. You're not just fighting for the truth anymore. You're fighting to take down an empire. They won't go down without a fight. Maria crossed her arms. We're ready for that fight. Are you with us? Lucas hesitated for a moment, but then his eyes hardened with resolve. I've already sent word. A few hundred allies are on their way. It's not much, but it's a start. We'll take the fight to them. Ellie turned back to the laptop, her hands steady despite the rising tension. She clicked send, and the files were distributed to journalists, activists, and whistleblowers who had been waiting for this moment. The truth was out. Now all they had to do was survive long enough to see it spread. As the files began to circulate, Ellie felt a sense of power she hadn't anticipated. The words were out there, the evidence was undeniable. But there was no time to dwell on the victory. The storm outside raged on as they made their final preparations. The world was about to change, and Ellie knew that when the dust settled, nothing would ever be the same again. The night was thick with anticipation as the storm outside continued to lash at the cabin. Inside, Ellie, Elon, Maria, and Lucas huddled together, staring at the screens, waiting for any sign that their plan was working. They had done everything they could to ensure the truth would spread. Now it was up to the world. Ellie felt her heart pounding in her chest, the adrenaline refusing to let up. The silence in the room was suffocating, each passing minute stretching longer than the last. Outside, the wind howled like an ominous warning, but it couldn't drown out the sound of their thoughts. Would the world be ready for what was coming? Would the people rise up to take down the consortium? Elon's phone buzzed, breaking the silence. He looked down at the screen and quickly checked the message. A brief flicker of hope passed across his face before it disappeared again, replaced by grim resolve. It started, Elon said, his voice steady but heavy. The first stories are out. Journalists are picking up the evidence, and the first protests are starting to form. Ellie leaned forward, her heart skipping a beat. The wave was beginning to form, but it was far from assured that it would break through the powers that be. She glanced at Maria and Lucas, both of whom seemed as anxious as she was. They had done their part, but now they were at the mercy of the public's reaction. How long before we know if it sticks? Ellie asked, her voice a mix of hope and fear. Maria shook her head, her eyes scanning her phone. It's hard to say, but the first signs are good. There's already a petition circulating, calling for government investigations into the consortium. People are angry, and they want answers. That's a good sign. But what about the backlash? Lucas interjected. The consortium won't sit back quietly. They have resources, control over the media, law enforcement, and even governments. They'll retaliate. Elon nodded, his face hard. We know. That's why we need to move quickly. The public pressure needs to be overwhelming. We have to keep pushing, or they'll try to bury it all. Ellie felt a wave of doubt creep in. They were fighting against a giant, and giants didn't fall easily. But then she remembered why they were doing this, why they had come so far, why they had risked everything. This wasn't just about exposing the truth. This was about making sure the world knew that they were no longer going to be controlled. As the hours passed, the intensity of the storm outside seemed to mirror the rising intensity of events inside. The first protests broke out in several major cities. Thousands of people, fueled by the stories that had gone viral, were demanding accountability, pushing for transparency. And while the crowds were peaceful, the sheer size and force of their numbers were enough to send ripples of fear through the consortium. The news was buzzing with coverage. Political commentators were questioning the legitimacy of the consortium's power. Social media exploded with people rallying behind the cause. But it wasn't just the protests that concerned the consortium. It was the momentum, the shift in public opinion. The longer they waited, the harder it would be to contain. Then came the phone call. Maria's face went pale as she listened, her fingers gripping her phone tightly. Ellie leaned forward, her pulse quickening. Something was wrong. Maria hung up, her eyes dark with worry. It's worse than we thought. The consortium's goons are already in the media. They're discrediting the evidence, calling it a fabrication. They're saying we've staged the entire thing to undermine public trust. Ellie's stomach dropped. This was the strategy they had feared, dismissing the truth as a lie, using their control over the media to make the public doubt what they had seen. Do they have any real evidence? Ellie asked, though she already knew the answer. The consortium was too powerful for the truth to be easily dismissed. No, Maria said firmly, but they're manipulating the narrative. They've got people on their side, influential people. They'll throw everything they can to turn this around. Lucas, ever the strategist, paced the room. We knew they'd fight back. The key now is to keep the pressure on them. We need more leaks, more witnesses. We have to make them look desperate. Elon's face was tight with concentration. We can't stop now. This is the moment when the real fight begins. We need to get the truth to more people. Shut down their narrative before it takes hold. The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. Elon, Maria, and Lucas worked tirelessly, their contacts stretching across every corner of the media and political world. Ellie, meanwhile, kept her focus on organizing the release of even more critical documents, files that would further expose the consortium's wrongdoing. But it wasn't just about the documents. They needed the people to stand with them. Ellie and Maria pushed their social media campaign harder, reaching out to activists and influencers to amplify their message. The more eyes on the truth, the harder it would be for the consortium to control the narrative. And the protests grew. What had started as small rallies in a few cities quickly turned into massive movements across the country. Tens of thousands of people, no, hundreds of thousands, were now marching, chanting, and demanding justice. It was no longer just about exposing a few powerful individuals. It was about dismantling an entire system of corruption. Ellie watched the news one night, her stomach in knots as the cameras captured the chaos unfolding in the streets. People were angry, and their anger was palpable. There were clashes with police, and the government was starting to scramble. Some were calling for martial law. The consortium was pulling every string it could to maintain control, but it was clear the tide was shifting. But then, just as things seemed to be spiraling out of control, a new message appeared on Ellie's phone. It was from one of their allies inside the government. It's happening. We're in. The first arrests have been made. It's just the beginning. Stay safe. We'll be in touch soon. Ellie felt a surge of relief. The first cracks had appeared in the consortium's armor. Their empire was crumbling, piece by piece, and they were right at the heart of it. But the war was far from over. The sound of sirens in the distance seemed almost comforting now, a sign that the battle was truly underway. Ellie sat by the window, watching the lights of the city flicker through the rain-soaked glass. The storm had finally subsided, but what loomed on the horizon was much more dangerous. The full-scale collapse of the consortium's empire. The first arrests had been made, but that was only the beginning. High-ranking officials within the organization were being taken into custody, one by one, as the public uproar gained momentum. The media was no longer controlled by the consortium's puppet strings. Instead, the stories of corruption, greed, and exploitation flooded every channel. People were beginning to demand accountability. Ellie felt the weight of it all. The files they had released, the protests, the arrests, it was all coming together, but the danger wasn't over yet. If anything, it had only intensified. The consortium had underestimated the resolve of the public, and now they were desperate. Elon, Maria, and Lucas had spent the night strategizing. Despite the progress they'd made, they all knew that this was only the beginning of the end. The consortium would not go down quietly. We've exposed their underbelly, but now we need to finish what we started, Elon said, pacing the small room. His mind was always 3 steps ahead, but even he couldn't predict just how far the storm would go. Maria nodded in agreement. It's not just about arresting the key players anymore. We need to dismantle the entire system. We have to make sure the public knows this wasn't just about a few corrupt individuals. It's about an entire network of control. Exactly, Lucas added, his voice steady. We need to spread the message that this isn't just a political fight. It's a fight for freedom, for the future of the people. If we're going to win, we need to keep pushing. The pressure has to stay on. Ellie's phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. She glanced down at the screen, seeing a message from an unknown number. We're in. The final piece is in place. The world will know the truth, completely. She couldn't help but smile, a sense of relief washing over her. The final piece. They had been waiting for this moment, the one that would tip the scales and ensure that the consortium's lies were completely exposed. It was the evidence that would destroy the last of their power. "Is it ready?" Elon asked, walking over to her. Ellie nodded. "We're just waiting for the right time to release it. Once we do, there will be no turning back." The plan was simple but dangerous. They would release the final set of documents. This time, it would include the names and faces of every individual involved in the consortium's inner circle. It would detail not only their illicit activities, but also their connections to major global corporations, governments, and influential organizations. This wasn't just about a few bad apples. It was about an entire system of global manipulation. But there was a risk. If the consortium found out who had leaked the information, they would stop at nothing to silence them. "Are we sure about this?" Maria asked, her voice low but serious. "This could start a war. No matter how right we are, they'll fight back with everything they have." Ellie turned to look at her, determination setting in her gaze. "If we don't do this, nothing changes. They'll find a way to cover it up, to rewrite history. We can't let them win." Elon stepped up beside her, his jaw set with quiet resolve. "We've come this far. We can't stop now." The minutes ticked by, each one heavier than the last. Ellie could feel her nerves tightening, but there was no turning back. She had made the decision, and so had they. They were in this together. At precisely midnight, Ellie hit the send button. The final set of files was released into the public domain. The documents spread like wildfire across the internet. Social media platforms, news outlets, and forums were flooded with the new revelations. The truth, the whole truth, was now out in the open. Ellie watched as the news unfolded in real time. Headlines began to appear: global elites exposed in leaked files, consortium's global web of corruption unraveled. Politicians, CEOs, and billionaires linked to global conspiracy. The scandal of the century. The world was in shock. The images of the key players, people who had been untouchable for so long, now hung in the balance. These were the people who had profited off the backs of the powerless, the ones who had pulled the strings from behind closed doors. And now, their masks were ripped off. But as the public reacted with outrage and disbelief, the consortium responded with everything they had left. The media campaigns began almost immediately. But this time, the damage was already done. People were no longer willing to listen to the lies. The evidence was irrefutable, and the truth was inescapable. Protests grew fiercer, reaching a fever pitch. Law enforcement struggled to maintain control as the streets filled with people demanding justice. The government scrambled to respond, but the momentum had already shifted. Ellie, Elon, Maria, and Lucas watched from the cabin as the world reacted. Their phones buzzed nonstop with messages, but they didn't dare take their eyes off the screen. This was their moment, the one they had fought for, the one that could bring real change. Hours later, they received confirmation from one of their allies within the government. The arrests were not stopping. Even more key players were being taken into custody, and investigations were already underway. The political landscape was shifting, and for the first time in years, it seemed like the people were winning. But just as hope began to rise, a new message came through. "They know who you are. Get out now. They'll be coming for you soon." The consortium wasn't finished yet. They had lost control of the narrative, but they still had power. Power they would stop at nothing to reclaim. The fight was far from over. The urgency in the message was clear. They know who you are. Get out now. The words haunted Ellie as she stared at her phone, her breath catching in her throat. The consortium had always been steps ahead, and now, with their power slipping away, they were coming for her and the team. There was no more time to hesitate. Their fight was no longer just about exposing the truth. It was about survival. "We need to go," Elon said, his voice steady, but there was an edge of concern in his eyes. He had already begun packing the few things they had in the cabin. He moved with purpose, but even he knew the stakes were higher than ever. Ellie felt a surge of panic, but she pushed it down. They had come too far to let fear stop them now. "We've done what we needed to. The world knows the truth. It's out there. The consortium won't be able to cover it up this time." Maria stood by the window, looking out into the darkness. "The pressure is too high. If we stay here, we're sitting ducks. But if we run, We may never have another chance to finish what we started. Ellie clenched her fists. There was no perfect solution. They had been running for so long, fighting so hard, that the idea of giving up, even for their own safety, felt impossible. Elon, Maria said, turning toward him, we've been pushing this far. We can't stop now. Elon didn't respond immediately. Instead, he picked up his phone and tapped out a quick message to one of their few remaining contacts within the government. He looked up, his face grave. We have an escape plan. There's a safe house, a place where we can hide until we know the situation is clearer. It's a risk, but it's the only one we have. Ellie took a deep breath. Let's move. The drive was long and tense. The storm had passed, but the air was thick with uncertainty. Each passing mile felt like a countdown, the sense of urgency palpable. Ellie stared out of the window, watching the blurred landscape pass by, her thoughts racing. She had always been a fighter, but this felt different. The weight of everything they had exposed, all the lives that would be changed forever because of their actions, it was overwhelming. You know, Lucas said, breaking the silence, we might never be able to go back to our old lives. If we make it through this, it's going to be a different world. For all of us. Ellie nodded, but her heart wasn't in the conversation. She didn't want to think about what would happen after this. They couldn't afford to get distracted. The mission was still unfinished. Suddenly, Elon's phone buzzed again. He glanced down at it, and his expression darkened. It's bad, he muttered. The consortium's pulling out all the stops. They've got mercenaries, private security. They're trying to shut down everything we've done. Maria's jaw tightened. We can't let them win. Not now. We won't, Elon said firmly. But we have to get to the safe house. It's the only place we'll be able to regroup. The safe house was in the middle of nowhere. An old, abandoned farmhouse tucked away in the hills, surrounded by thick woods. It was the perfect place to lay low, but Ellie knew it wouldn't be enough to hide forever. The consortium had resources everywhere, and they wouldn't stop until they wiped out every last trace of opposition. Inside the house, Ellie and the team began preparing for the next phase. Elon had already started contacting their allies in the government, trying to keep the pressure on and ensure the leaks kept coming. Maria and Lucas began to strategize how they could expand the protests even further, organizing people across the nation to keep the public focus on the corruption they had exposed. But Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was getting personal now. The consortium wasn't just fighting for their reputation. They were fighting for survival, and they would stop at nothing to erase anyone who stood in their way. Late that night, as Ellie lay in the dimly lit room of the farmhouse, her mind kept returning to one thought. Would they be able to finish what they started? They had revealed the truth to the world, but the real fight, dismantling the system, making sure it could never rise again, had only just begun. The next morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, Ellie stood by the window of the farmhouse, looking out at the world that had already begun to change. The protests were now worldwide, and governments were being forced to respond. The consortium was losing ground, but Ellie knew the road ahead would not be easy. The people were demanding justice, but the powers that be would fight back with everything they had. But something had shifted, something she couldn't quite explain. The world had woken up, and no matter what the consortium did, they couldn't silence the truth forever. They were no longer just a team of misfits, fighting against the powerful. They were the voice of the people, and that was a power the consortium could never control. As Ellie gathered with the team in the farmhouse, they made one final vow, to keep pushing forward, no matter the cost. The consortium's power was crumbling, but its reach still stretched far. It was only a matter of time before they would need to make their final stand. But for now, they were alive. They had exposed the truth, and as long as they kept fighting, the world would keep watching. The morning sun cast a pale, golden light through the old farmhouse windows, illuminating the faces of those who had sacrificed so much. Ellie stood in front of the team, a sense of quiet determination settling over her. This was it, the endgame, the moment that would either solidify everything they had fought for or bring it all crashing down. They had been in hiding for nearly a week now, but the pressure was mounting. The consortium was regrouping, coming up with new ways to counteract the revelations they had unleashed. Yet, despite their best efforts, The truth had already sparked a wildfire that could not be contained. "Here's the plan," Elon said, standing before a wall of monitors displaying news clips, social media feeds, and government responses. "The protests are growing. The pressure is undeniable. But we can't let this fizzle out. We need one final push, something that will make sure this doesn't just become another headline. We need to bring the fight to their doorstep." Maria paced behind him, a fierce glint in her eyes. "We have the support. The people are with us. But we also know that the consortium's not going down without a fight. We need to hit them where it hurts, destroy their resources, their control over the media, and their remaining influence." Lucas, who had been quiet for the past few hours, finally spoke. "We've been working in the shadows for too long. It's time to make them look us in the eye. We can't hide anymore." Ellie nodded, her hands clenched at her sides. "We take the fight to them. Full exposure. It's not just about the consortium anymore. It's about ensuring that no one like them ever gets the power to control the world in this way again." The room fell silent for a moment as they each processed the enormity of their mission. This was it. No more hiding, no more waiting. They were going to dismantle the system, once and for all. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Ellie worked with Elon to refine the final data dump they would release, a detailed dossier on the consortium's financial operations, connections to illicit organizations, and the bribery scandals that had kept them in power for decades. This information, if it were to be made public, would expose not just the people behind the consortium but the very infrastructure that supported them. The truth would spread like wildfire. Maria and Lucas coordinated with protest leaders across the country. They needed to be sure that the demonstrations would peak at the exact moment they dropped the final bombshell. This wasn't just about dropping a file. It was about overwhelming the powers that be with an unstoppable wave of support. A wave they couldn't ignore. But even as they prepared, they knew the risks. The consortium had resources, military-grade security, surveillance networks, and a ruthless commitment to protecting their empire. They would fight back with everything they had. This wasn't just a political battle anymore. It was a battle for the future. As night fell, the world held its breath. Ellie sat in front of the computer, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The world was waiting for this moment. This was her moment. "Ready?" Elon asked, standing beside her. She looked up at him. His face was a mask of calm, but she could see the tension in his eyes. They both knew the stakes. The team was behind them, waiting for the signal to move. Ellie took a deep breath, then nodded. "Let's do this."